car, just as Imani turned to him with an angry look on her face. Then it all happened too fast to fully understand. Sounds were overwhelming, but he couldn't quite hear them. There were bursts of light and dark. He felt pain and then nothingness. A while later, Tyson found himself lying in tall grass, cold water soaking his clothes. Pain rushed back, reminding him that she was gone. "No, no, no!" Tyson shot up from his pillow, gasping for air as the familiar nightmare pulled him awake, just like many times in the past 5 years. He felt a ghostly pain that reminded him of the time he spent in the hospital recovering from his injuries, endless hours fighting through pain to regain his strength. When he could finally use his hands, move his arms, stand on his feet, and hold himself up, he pushed himself hard to mask his sadness with physical pain. He shed the extra weight he was carrying. It felt like layers were falling away as he searched for a reason to keep going. He was becoming a new person, but what was the point? His weakness slowly turned into strength, yet he still pushed himself harder. He told himself that pain would help him heal, but deep down, it was just a way to avoid his feelings. After many months of difficult workouts, the therapists allowed him only short visits to the gym. This made him focus on his grief and face the emotions he tried to escape. It took another 8 months before the doctors decided it was safe for him to go home. "Aw, sweetie, is that bad dream back again?" Her voice was achingly familiar but felt wrong. Tyson's heart ached every time he heard it, but he chose not to answer. He had fought his way out of darkness while recovering in the hospital, and the strength of his mind was something he needed to keep building. He wouldn't give that up now. Imani was gone. She was gone. She wasn't sitting at the edge of his bed, slender and graceful in her soft nightwear, her curly hair inviting his touch, her warm brown skin longing for connection, and looking at him with gentle eyes that held care and understanding. Tyson fell back onto his pillow, closed his eyes, and rubbed his face. He ran through his thoughts, and when he reached the end, he opened his eyes. As always, she was gone. The doctors had used many big words while trying to understand his feelings, the crash, and his memories of his mother. Survivor's guilt and post-traumatic stress were the main topics, but they had so many other terms he couldn't recall. He never talked to the doctors about Imani's brief nighttime visits. If he had, he might still be in the hospital. It felt easier to just accept these moments and move on. Besides, he had his other passion, mathematics, to help clear his mind. She started visiting him at night after he worked hard in his therapy sessions. As he lay in bed, his body aching, he imagined she came to see him. From the beginning, he knew to keep this to himself. He learned later what it might mean after being sent home. He read a lot about how the mind deals with losing someone, especially after a sudden event. His struggle to accept her absence, shown by his tears when he woke up, showed that his mind was trying to fill that void. Where there was an emptiness, his mind filled it with her. 5 years was a long time to have these moments, but like his lonely routine and daily habits, he found comfort in what was familiar. Perhaps he just wasn't ready to move on. As it always did after nightmares, his mind drifted back to the night of the party. Tyson hadn't even wanted to go. It was Imani who insisted they leave the house, saying they needed to show support for a man who had been very helpful to Tyson. This man claimed he was the reason Tyson got his job as a math professor at the local university. Tyson knew the truth. It was really the dean's wife who had made it happen. The party was to honor the dean's retirement. Franklin Dunnings was stepping down and looking forward to a relaxing life by the beach in a Central American country. Tyson, Imani, his colleagues, and their spouses were all there for one last celebration before he and his wife began a new journey. Tyson wasn't sure if this new plan was truly what his childhood friend wanted. Ashley Dunnings had lived next door to him for as long as he could remember. They went through school together from kindergarten to college, being the best of friends. But Tyson's amazing ability to understand numbers took him away from their hometown so he could learn from experts at universities around the world. When he finally came back, he found out he had missed his best friend's wedding. To celebrate his return and Ashley finding someone special, Tyson had a bit too much to drink. He lost his balance on some stairs and ended up in Imani's hospital. She introduced herself to him, the genius who had trouble with simple steps, and he felt drawn to her. At the party that night, everyone noticed Ashley was missing, which was unusual. Franklin, Ashley's husband, made excuses for her and insisted they keep the party going, even though Ashley's joyful spirit was what made these gatherings fun. Tyson wanted to leave since he never really connected with Franklin and wasn't too upset about him leaving the university. But Imani seemed much more at ease at this party than she had been at previous ones. He wondered if it had anything to do with Ashley not being there, especially since he had sensed some tension between them before. About an hour and a half later, Ashley rushed into the party like a storm. It was surprising, especially for someone as petite and lovely as she was. It was clear she had been drinking and was upset, but she had shifted to anger. Tyson exchanged a worried glance with Imani. To everyone's shock, Ashley loudly announced that her husband was cheating with a young student. It seemed she had just come from a private meeting and had photos to back up her claim. When Franklin came back with more drinks, a heated argument broke out between him and Ashley. It was painful to watch, and eventually, Franklin stormed out. After that, Ashley was left with no strength. She broke down in tears. Tyson stepped in to help her and looked at Imani with surprise when she made a sound of protest. He gently picked up Ashley and carried her upstairs to her room as Imani took care of the remaining guests. The party was over, just like Ashley and Franklin's marriage. Tyson laid Ashley on her bed, her beautiful hair spread across the pillow. They looked at each other, and suddenly she wrapped her arms around him and kissed him. For a moment, Tyson let it happen, but then he gently pulled her arms away and moved back. She looked into his eyes, searching for an answer, but he could only shake his head. Their chance to become more than friends had slipped away. Ashley turned away and quietly cried. As he stepped into the hallway, he found Imani waiting for him. He looked at her, feeling sorry for his friend, and stopped when he saw the anger in Imani's eyes. She handed him a tissue, pointing at his mouth. He wiped his lips and noticed the lipstick stain. "She's drunk." "But you're not. I'm leaving," Imani snapped and turned to walk away, heading downstairs and out the front door. He hurried to keep up with her, worried that her words meant more than they seemed. As he drove them home, he felt her gaze on him. "She surprised me," he said quietly. Silence filled the car. His anger began to rise. He hadn't done anything wrong. He was only trying to help someone in distress. Yes, she was a friend, someone who might have become more in another time, but that never happened. "What did you expect me to do, abandon a friend when she needed help?" he said, raising his voice. "Just a friend. The lipstick tells a different story," Imani shot back. "I told you she surprised me. Her marriage just fell apart and she was hurting. She needed someone to help her feel better." "Of course that had to be you," Imani yelled. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his rising anger. "What do you have against Ashley?" "I don't know. Maybe it's because she wants the man who promised to be my loyal husband," she replied sharply. "A promise I've never broken and never will," he retorted. As he sped along the winding country road toward home, he noticed Imani trying to steady her breathing. "I see how she looks at you at the faculty parties," she said quietly, but with clear bitterness. She really should know when to stop. At that moment, he felt as if he didn't know the woman sitting next to him, the woman who had captured his heart on the day they met in the hospital, the woman he had promised to stay loyal to for life. Though their journey had not always been easy, they had celebrated many years together, her recent milestone birthday being just a month prior. He had liked the idea of enjoying their golden years together. As he stared out at the familiar road ahead, he wondered if he truly understood her. He thought back to the gatherings they had attended at the hospital and among her friends. Imani was well liked and respected at work. Still, there were moments when he had felt insecure as he watched her charm others. He fought those feelings, since she always made a point to connect with him during those events and would give him a quick kiss in front of everyone. He couldn't understand her anger towards Ashley during those times, but he had never confronted her like this. His mouth started moving before he even realized what he was saying. "The difference is, I don't treat Ashley the way you treat Devin, Doctor." Wilson was the head surgeon at the hospital. He was tall, fit, handsome, smart, and single, though he was actually a divorcee. It seemed there was something he struggled with. As he watched her turn to face him, he noticed her anger, but there was something else, too, something that made him worried. Could it be doubt, or maybe guilt? Then suddenly they were reminded of a past moment. "No!" Tyson shouted, pressing his hands against his eyes to block out his memories. It was time to get going. Start the day and stick to the routine. There was peace in following patterns. Christy Taylor was having a tough day, and Fridays were supposed to be better. She frowned, and everyone around her noticed. She knew she was attractive. While good looks were partly due to genetics, she worked hard to enhance her beauty. She used the right skincare products to keep her skin smooth. She ate healthily to stay fit, and went to the gym to keep her body in shape. She also visited the salon weekly to keep her long blonde hair shiny and her nails painted in the newest colors. Her friends believed she should pursue modeling because she had the looks and height, but that wasn't what she wanted. She glanced at her nails and admired the deep red polish, then her attention shifted to the glittering diamonds on her engagement ring. Once, this ring made her excited, but today, it brought her no feelings at all. Her fiancé, Blake Carlington, was handsome and well-off, but after 8 months together, she realized there was no magic between them. They didn't share any spark. Recently, she had slipped into a low mood. The things that used to make her happy felt empty now. She maintained her looks and kept up with fashion, but even shopping no longer excited her. She wasn't just a pretty face. Christy had brains too and was doing well in most of her classes, once hoping to graduate at the top of her class. Now, she was called in to see Professor Haley, her math teacher, because her grade was dropping. She needed that math credit to move to the next year, but even the worry about falling behind left her feeling numb. The boredom she felt was draining the importance from everything in her life. She needed to stay professional. Christy knocked on the office door and heard a voice invite her in. She entered to find a messy room filled with papers. If you looked at George Haley's office, you might think he was stuck in the past and didn't want to use the internet. That was somewhat true for his personal work. He liked working with paper for his math experiments, but for his regular work with students, the university made him use online methods. Still, he tried to use paper whenever he could. She saw a short, stout man with wild white hair and a bushy mustache sitting at his desk. He looked up and smiled at her. "Ah, Miss Taylor, how can I help you?" he asked, blinking at her. She twirled a piece of her blonde hair as she replied, "You wanted to talk to me about my grades." The professor nodded and pinched the bridge of his nose. "Yes, your grades are slipping, and if you don't improve, I'll have no choice but to fail you." "Is there a test I can take to boost my grade?" she asked, hopefully. He looked at her seriously. "Understanding the material is what will raise your grade. The next exam is very important. You need to master the course content by then." She frowned, knowing she had been struggling with the last few chapters. "I need a tutor." "Yes, I was just going to suggest that," Haley said with excitement. "I know a well-respected man who is a true expert in mathematics and a natural teacher. If you want to learn the material quickly, you will need someone like him." Christy looked at the professor carefully. "Is he at the university?" A sad look crossed his face for a moment. "Not anymore, no. He retired early." He focused his eyes on Christy. "I want to stress how important it is that you avoid failing my course. You need to persuade him to tutor you." He seemed deep in thought. Then a small smile appeared. "I'll write you a letter of introduction that should help, but you must convince him." He took a piece of paper and started writing the letter. "What made him retire early if he's such a good teacher?" Christy asked, genuinely curious. The mystery about this genius was lifting her spirits. Haley folded the letter and sealed it in an envelope. He wrote something quickly on the outside and handed it to her. Christy's eyes widened when she saw the name on it. Tyson Kane, the man who stopped the terrorists? "Stop! Don't bring that up with him or remind him of his part in it. He lost his wife that night and doesn't need to hear it again." He pointed to a photo on the wall of a strong, bearded man in a suit with his arm around a lovely woman with curly hair. "All Tyson should focus on is his joy of teaching. The letter will help you meet him, but you must show him why he should take you as a student." Christy gave the professor a surprised and upset look while he stared back at her, puzzled. "Are you saying I need to offer him something in return?" "What? No!" Haley replied sharply, leaving Christy even more confused. "Show him that you want to make something of your life. Prove that you deserve his time. He doesn't respect those who just float through life without trying to contribute." Show him your ambition. If you do that, he'll be willing to teach you, and then you'll succeed in my class." Christy glanced nervously at the envelope, beginning to understand how important this was. "Go see him tomorrow. Do you have plans for Saturday morning?" he asked, and she shook her head. "Thank you, Professor Haley," she said, nodding as she left the office. She headed to the library, determined to learn all she could about Mr. Kane. This was a chance she couldn't afford to blow. George Haley sank into his comfortable chair as the young woman left. He stared at the door, battling with the lie he had written in the letter to his friend, Tyson. He tried to push aside his doubts, believing the small lie was okay if it helped break through the wall Tyson had built around himself. It was a shame for someone as brilliant as Tyson to isolate himself at 58. What young Miss Taylor didn't know was that while Tyson disliked those who wandered through life, he was starting to become one himself. That explained his own view of himself. If George had been religious, he would have prayed for Christy to help Tyson reconnect with the world. He smiled at the thought. It was nice that the young woman resembled Ashley from years ago. But his smile faded as he thought about the woman who vanished during the dean's retirement party. For a time, everyone thought Franklin had done something terrible to her. Then news came out that she had left the country the next day. Much of the money from their joint account was gone, and a law firm in New York contacted Franklin about divorce papers. The man was in a hurry to sign the papers, and soon after, he sold the house and vanished into the forests of Central America. Now, Tyson felt the loss of his best friend, just like he felt the absence of his wife. George tried to help, but he just couldn't reach him. Maybe he needed a softer touch. Miss Taylor had plenty of that. Tyson stood barefoot on the grass in his backyard, near a small patio table and chairs he rarely used. He had a morning routine, but that was about it. He took off his big towel robe and draped it over one of the chairs. He walked over to the lake, standing on the sandy edge of his property. He was close to the neighbors, but so far nobody complained about him swimming without clothes or sunbathing the same way. He never looked around to see if anyone was watching, and he didn't mind. He stepped into the cool water and walked until he could dive in. The water was brisk, but he pushed through the chill until he found a smooth rhythm and warmed up his muscles. With little body fat, he had to keep moving, or he would sink. As he did every day, he swam straight out from his home until he felt tired. That was his sign to turn back. If he made it home, he would have a good workout and improve his stamina. If he didn't, at least he had tried, and the lake would take him. Would today be that day? 3 miles south of the university town was a beautiful lake surrounded by thick forest. Along the northern edge, there was a 3-mile stretch of road with 20 small houses placed where it was safe to build. The rest of the shoreline was steep granite rising above the water. The northern part sloped gently with sand before dropping into deeper water. These homes were once connected to town by a narrow, winding road that no longer allowed cars. Christy drove her white Mercedes-Benz along the freshly paved road built just 4 years ago. It connected the eastern side of town to the lakefront road. From her research, she discovered the sad story behind how Tyson Kane's car ended up on the tracks just as a train approached the old crossing. 2 high school students who faced harsh bullying made a plan to get back at their town, which they felt had let them down. One was the son of a railroad worker, and the other was the son of a construction manager. They managed to take an old train engine and link it to a flatbed car filled with things they had made. They drove the train along an abandoned line that went through the countryside and towards the center of town. They intended to crash the train in the town's main area to cause destruction. Instead, they collided with Tyson's car, splitting it apart. Tyson was thrown from the driver's seat and landed in a ditch as the car went under the train. The train derailed a little further down the tracks. Sadly, Tyson's wife and the 2 young men lost their lives, but the explosives did not go off. Because it was a quiet area with few people around, no one saw the accident or knew it had happened. 2 hours after the crash, the students' manifesto was automatically posted on social media, explaining their actions. The town's police were quickly alerted, and 3 patrol cars were sent to investigate. 90 minutes later, an officer found Tyson seriously injured in the ditch. That's when things got really serious. While Tyson was taken to the hospital, emergency workers found the train overturned in the bushes further down the damaged tracks. The young men's bodies were mostly whole, but Tyson was in bad shape. A bomb squad was called in to carefully remove the explosives. Christie read that GRT Corporation, which owned the local freight railroad, faced a lot of backlash in court and from the public, leading them to make significant reparations to Mr. Kane and to the town. GRT quickly started a project to take out the tracks from the old line. They removed the rusty rails and wooden ties. Then road crews came in to smooth out the ground and laid down a nice 6-foot-wide asphalt path from the accident site to the edge of town. However, they did not remove the tracks that ran through the main part of town. With permission from the town council, those road crews built a wide 2-lane road that Christie was using. Once it was finished, the town council closed the old country road to cars and made it part of the trail system. As it connected to the western edge of town, the road formed a 15-mile loop. With any new development, local leaders were involved in the planning. Large areas of land near the road, especially those not surrounded by stone, were set aside for new upscale housing. Neighborhoods full of big homes began to appear. One good thing for the people living around the lake was that the land south of the old train track still belonged to GRT. They stopped any new building there. The rules for those who owned lakefront property meant their homes would stay unchanged, so no new houses would be built on the lake. Once Christie learned more about the man, she looked into his background and found evidence he was indeed very smart in math. He had an excellent education, and his work at the university made her wish he was still there. Some had called him a big, friendly teddy bear while also being a math expert. She went through old photos at the university to see how he had built this reputation over the years. He had been 53 at the time of the accident and was a big man then. Now, at 58, she imagined he may have become heavier and needed help to get around because of his injuries. Still, she needed his brilliance to help her overcome her current struggles. While driving past a neighborhood of large houses, Christie shook her head. The land around them seemed empty. She believed they should have planted big trees around the homes like they had in her parents' neighborhood. Ahead, she saw the trail crossing the new road and noticed no cars coming from either direction, so she drove over the bump and entered the woods. A short distance in, she turned onto the old road by the lake. Christie looked at the envelope again to find the house number she needed. Tyson's place was closer to the other end, so she continued on, enjoying the view. All the homes faced the lake and many had gates, which seemed unnecessary since they were already open to the lake. Thankfully, all the houses were one story and blended well with the surroundings. Some were wider to make up for not having a second floor. Eventually, as she neared her destination, she slowed down and turned into a gravel driveway. There was no other car there, making her worry that he might not be home. The house was lovely. It was a cozy, ranch-style cottage nestled among the trees with many unique and thoughtful design features. She almost expected to see tiny creatures flying around the beautiful gardens near the home. Turning off the engine, she stepped out and took a deep breath of the fresh morning air. It felt so clean. She looked at her outfit one last time. She wore her best business clothes, a red silk blouse, black slacks, and low-heeled red leather shoes that matched her top. She chose a top that didn't cling too tightly, as she wanted to keep the focus on her skills rather than her appearance. With no pants that were more flattering, she opted for black, hoping to minimize her curves. Taking a deep breath to calm her nerves, she prepared for her speech as she walked up the 3 steps to the front door. She pressed the doorbell and heard a faint sound from inside. After a moment of silence, she pressed the doorbell again. Still nothing. Christie had not planned for this situation. She had many ideas for impressing him, but none for a situation where he might not be home. Standing at his front step, she glanced around. Maybe he was visiting a neighbor? The empty driveway and garage suggested he was out. "Come on, you can do it. Don't give up." The morning was still, and her soft words drifted over to her left. She turned to the neighbor's house and noticed a single-story home with a rooftop deck. An older woman with white hair was looking through binoculars at something on the water. Curious, Christie stepped down the stairs, walked to the side of the house, and saw a gate leading to the backyard. There was a small sign saying private, but after a moment, she decided to walk through anyway. The path went between the house and a tall hedge to the backyard. As she moved closer to the water, she realized the house was much bigger than it looked from the street. Suddenly, she heard coughing and gasping and turned toward the water. A man was trying to climb out of the lake. He managed to get to his feet and staggered a few steps before falling to his hands and knees, trying to catch his breath. She felt a strong urge to help. A loud cry came from him, and she paused at the corner of the house, watching as he slowly pushed himself up again. He was unclothed. He stood there, eyes closed, breathing heavily to regain his strength. Once he seemed a bit more steady, he began to walk out of the water toward the house, running his hands through his long black hair to squeeze out the water. That made the gray patches in his hair stand out. Christy felt uncertain. She was there to meet the professor who loved teddy bears, but a very fit man was at his house. She noticed his strong physique. His muscles were well defined, but he was not bulky. His skin looked smooth, and she spotted a slight limp, which indicated he was favoring his left knee. It looked like he had a scar there, suggesting he had knee surgery. As she looked around, her gaze fell back to him, but she tried to focus on his face. She didn't realize he had stopped until he spoke. "Who are you, and why are you here?" His voice was deep, and he sounded angry. Christy instinctively stepped away from the building and into the backyard. "I'm Christy Taylor. I need to talk to Professor Kane." The man frowned and walked toward a chair with a robe on it. He didn't try to hide himself, so Christy forced her gaze back to his face. She looked for any hint he might find her interesting, but all she saw was annoyance. He picked up the robe and put it on, tying it around his waist, then looked at her again. "No one by that name is here. Leave." "Professor Haley told me he lived here. He sent me to find Professor Kane," she said, feeling bolder now that he was covered. The man paused, showing a hint of discomfort. "George Haley." "Yes, I have a letter from him for Professor Kane," she replied, feeling hopeful that she could get information from him. Perhaps this was a relative of the professor. He looked like he might be in his late 30s to early 40s, with some resemblance to Professor Kane. He extended his hand and she glanced at it, then at his frustrated face. "Give me the letter," he said with a growl. Christy frowned. "No, I have to give it directly to Professor Kane. And I told you there's no Professor Kane here. That's me, Tyson Kane. Hand over the letter." Her eyes widened as she realized who he was. He gestured for her to give it to him. You can't be him." He looked confused. "What do you mean?" "Of course I am. But he's almost 60. You can't be that old," she said in surprise. He let out a small laugh before his expression turned serious again. "I don't have time for this. If I'm almost 60, just give me the letter from George or leave." "If you are him, why did you say there is no one by that name?" she asked, still firm. His frown returned. "I told you there's no Professor Kane here. That man passed away 5 years ago. I haven't taught anyone since that night." His face showed that he had seen terrible things. Christy's jaw dropped. Suddenly she believed him. This was Tyson Kane, but he looked so different. She had to admit that he looked much better now. Teddy bears are cute, but this was something else. Her eyes took in his long black hair now drying down his back. The gray at his temples stood out more. He didn't have those in the old pictures. The letter? She flinched and then reached into her purse to hand him the envelope. He took it from her and looked at the writing on the front. With a deep sigh, he opened it. Christy let her gaze wander over him while he was distracted. She hadn't felt a spark of excitement in a long time. Tyson unfolded the letter slowly. The handwriting was definitely George's. He read the hurried note. "Dear Tyson, I hope you are well. The woman in front of you is Miss Christy Taylor. She's in my class and her grades have dropped suddenly. She is very bright, so this change is strange and I'm unsure why. You might wonder why this matters to you. I would appreciate it if you could find some time to help her understand what's wrong and guide her in the right direction. I find myself in a tough spot, as I owe her father a fair amount of money after losing a poker game at his home. He said he would accept help for her instead of cash. I wouldn't directly influence her grades, but tutoring is my only option. I cannot show favoritism to my students, and I doubt anyone but you could help her improve so quickly. Please don't mention the gambling debts to Miss Taylor. I want her to believe her success is entirely due to her own hard work." Thank you for considering this. Your friend George. He sighed again, feeling tight in his chest. He really didn't want to help, but he couldn't say no to George. He was the only friend who still visited, even though Tyson was a terrible host. That was Amani's strength. He folded the letter and put it back in the envelope, stalling as he tried to think of what to say to the young woman in front of him. "Will you do it?" she asked. He looked into her eyes and felt himself getting ready to nod. Did anyone ever say no to this lovely person? He kept his expression steady. "I haven't even had my breakfast yet. Come on. Please tell me why I should spend my time with you." He walked to the patio doors that led into the living room. When he invited the lovely blonde to sit, he noticed she was looking around with joy. It made him look around too, but all he saw were reminders of those who were no longer with him, which brought his mood down. He moved to the small wood-burning stove that kept the room warm. He opened the door and tossed George's letter inside. As he closed the door, the letter caught fire and quickly turned to ashes. He turned back to see his guest. "I need to take a shower and get dressed. Are you hungry?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, but I would love some espresso or coffee if you're making it." He frowned and pointed to the machines in the kitchen. He didn't know how to use it, but George had shown him how to make coffee the last time he visited. "It works, but I'm not sure how to use it. If you know, feel free to help yourself." Tyson walked away without checking if she needed anything. He closed his bedroom door and entered the bathroom to put his robe in the laundry basket. He took a quick shower, shaved, and put on tan shorts and a black t-shirt. He rubbed a bit of unscented lotion on his aching left knee. Taking a deep breath, he opened his door and returned to the living room. He saw the young woman, now Miss Taylor, standing by the espresso machine. It was making sounds, so he figured she knew what she was doing. She turned and smiled at him, and he felt a strange sense of familiarity. "This machine is great, much better than the one at my parents' house," she exclaimed. His feeling of familiarity faded with her excitement. "I'm more of a plain black coffee person, but Amani loved her espresso," he replied without much interest. She smiled kindly, prompting him to head to the fridge to prepare breakfast. He took out 2 eggs, some yogurt, spinach, and a few small tomatoes. While he scrambled the eggs, he glanced over at her busy with the espresso machine. She was making 2 small cups. "These beans are really good," she said happily. He nodded slightly. "George brought them." She nodded back and finished making the espresso. "When I arrived, I didn't see a car outside. I thought you might have gone into town." "I don't drive," he answered straightly. She looked at him carefully. "Because of—" "Yes," he interrupted. She paused at his sudden reply. She slid one of the small cups toward him, and he nodded in thanks. "How do you get groceries?" she asked. He looked at her with some weariness. "They deliver?" He took a sip of the espresso. It was strong and good. He smiled back at her hopeful look, and her face brightened with a big smile. He felt a sense of familiarity, but was still missing the key piece that would help him understand. "You have a lovely home. Is that door for another bedroom?" she asked, pointing to the door next to his bedroom door. "Most of the things in that room used to belong to Imani." "Yes, but it's just a storage space and where I work out." Tyson finished his breakfast and moved it to the small table by the patio doors so he could look out at the lake while he ate. Of course, Miss Taylor took this as a sign to sit between him and the doors, blocking his view. Her smile made him feel a bit annoyed. He didn't like the pressure he was feeling. "Did George tell you I won't teach those who aren't serious?" he said, instantly regretting being so direct. "Yes, Professor Haley was very clear that I need to prove I'm worthy of your time," she replied calmly. "And?" Miss Taylor went on with her points while Tyson listened quietly, finishing his breakfast. He found himself nodding in approval as she shared impressive thoughts, and each time he did, she sat a bit taller, her smile brightening with each piece of encouragement. When she mentioned her grades slipping, he recalled George's words about the mystery. He found it puzzling that someone with so many opportunities would let her grades fall and not try to fix it. "Why?" he asked bluntly. Her smile faltered as she processed what she thought was a clear explanation. "No. Why are your grades slipping?" he clarified. He saw her pause for a moment, then she seemed to realize something. "My other classes feel easy. I understand the material well, but this class is different." I need to work harder here. And you haven't worked harder because... Her eyes met his and her smile faded as a brief shadow crossed her face. He recognized that struggle. Think about what you have, he said, and her expression changed. Anger sparked in her eyes. Look, I know I was born into a wealthy family, she started, frustration showing. Tyson shook his head. No, it's an exercise. List the things you're grateful for. She blinked, taken aback. Am I under some kind of evaluation? She asked, realizing what he was doing. He gave her a serious look. If I'm going to teach you effectively, I need to see if your challenges are just ideas or if there's more to it. Each situation needs its own way of handling things. He wanted to tell her he was not ready to deal with someone else's problems, but he kept quiet. She looked at him with wide eyes and went back to thinking about what she had, as he called it. Those are just ideas, he explained, and she shot him an annoyed look. Clearing her throat, she said, I'm thankful for my family. I'm thankful for my friends. I'm thankful for my fiancé. I'm thankful for studying at this university. I'm thankful for... Wait, you just named the most important things that can make you happy. People. Which one isn't true? She made a noise of anger, but he ignored it and continued. Your parents. Is your dad pushing you to do something you don't want? Is your mom too critical about your choices? He asked. No, they've been nothing but supportive, she replied, but he noticed something change in her face. So they support something you don't agree with. Let's move on, he said, and her anger grew. He didn't care. He felt he had nothing to lose. He understood why George wouldn't change her score. Tyson was also protecting his integrity as a teacher, even though he didn't want to go back to that job. Your friends, do you have anyone in your group you don't trust? Could someone be against you? He asked. Again, no. I don't keep toxic people close, she snapped. He nodded. Then it must be your fiancé. Does he fall short in some way? Is he too pushy? Not pushy enough? Has he hurt you? He would never, she gasped, her eyes wide. She looked at Tyson as if he was dangerous. But he doesn't excite you? Tyson took a guess, sensing her hesitation. Miss Taylor stood up and walked around the table. He sensed a slap coming, but accepted it. He had felt worse pain before. Christy rushed out of the house and sank into the driver's seat of her car before the tears started. She wasn't sure why she was crying. She told herself it was his rude behavior, but she knew that wasn't the whole truth. He had been right, and she couldn't handle it. She took a moment to breathe and gradually held back her tears until they stopped. She couldn't give up. Failing the course was not an option. She didn't want to show the man inside that he was right about her not being good enough. She was good enough. Christy climbed out of the car and grabbed the bag with her books and notes from the back seat. Taking a deep breath, she turned back to the cottage-style house. Be brave or go home. She walked back to the front door and rang the bell. Moments later, the man's face looked cautious as he watched her through the screen door. I'm sorry for my reaction, she said. His face remained serious as he replied, No, you're not. You had a reason. I was acting poorly. She paused for a moment. Can I come back in? He sighed and stepped aside, inviting her to enter. She went back to the table and placed her bag of books down. He glanced at it with concern. I haven't agreed to help you yet. You found out the problem that is affecting my grades. Only part of the problem has been addressed. Recognizing it is a good start, but you need a clear plan to fix it, or it will keep holding you back, he suggested. I'm calling off the engagement, she declared, surprised by how freeing those words felt. A weight lifted from her shoulders. Tyson's eyebrows raised in surprise. That seems a bit much for a minor issue. You could consider talking to someone about it. She frowned and shook her head. It's not just that. She thought for a moment, and with the decision to end the engagement made, the truths she had hidden from herself came forward. I think it's because we are too similar. Our lives are too alike, and we like the same things. Without differences, there are no sparks. It would be easy to be married to Blake, but I think I would be bored or feel tempted to stray. I'm sure he would, too. When he proposed, I got swept up in the excitement of marriage, but that's not enough. It wouldn't be fair to either of us. She looked at the diamond ring on her finger, sighed, and took it off, placing it in her purse. Can we start now? She asked, and he couldn't help but chuckle a little at her determination. Did I say I've agreed to help you yet? He replied. Her blue eyes met his brown eyes. You found the issue and I've shared my plan to fix it. I won't let this stop me from moving forward in my career. What else do you need? Christy stated firmly. He nodded to himself, seeing she was serious, and his last doubts faded. Okay, show me the last section you felt good about, Tyson said as he took a seat next to her at the small table. She smiled and opened her books, ready to review. They spent the rest of the morning studying. He went back to 2 more chapters until he felt she understood the material. You missed some details here, he pointed out, and she reflected on when they started that chapter. It was a couple of weeks after the engagement began. How did he know? She looked at Tyson's face and he looked back at her with curiosity. She smiled a bit shyly and then focused again on the textbook. He guided her through the chapters, explaining the formulas and showing examples. Christy took notes and felt the information sinking in. She raised her hand to pause on a specific problem they were working on. She remembered struggling with this part before, but now it seemed clearer. Why can't teachers explain this like you do? It makes so much more sense, she said, feeling frustrated. He shrugged. Everyone has their own way of teaching, but the math doesn't change. Numbers have their own beauty. He glanced at the clock. Are you hungry? She nodded with a small smile. I was about to make a salad with grilled chicken. Does that sound good? Tyson asked, and her smile grew as she agreed. Go over those 3 practice questions while I prepare lunch, he said, pointing to the textbook. Yes, sir, she replied with a grin. He headed to the kitchen, and she found herself watching him as he moved. Shaking her head to focus, she turned back to her notebook and started on the equations. She completed the first 2, but her mind wandered to thoughts of Tyson before she could tackle the 3rd question. She couldn't believe he was 58. He looked so fit. What's bothering you about the 3rd question? She jumped, startled by his voice breaking her train of thought. Sorry, what? He frowned gently. I asked what's giving you trouble on the 3rd one. Oh, nothing. I just got a bit distracted, she replied. He raised an eyebrow, then set their lunch plates on the table while she worked on the last question. Once she finished, she gave her work to him. He quickly checked it and smiled. You've got this. After lunch, we'll go through the next 4 chapters. It looks like just a small misunderstanding. No, I don't think you realize how much your style helps me learn, she insisted. He shook his head. I'm not a teacher anymore. She replied, and that's really too bad. If you want my help this afternoon, just drop that topic. She raised her hands in surrender. They began to eat, and Christy was impressed. The salad was fresh, and the grilled chicken was warm and a bit spicy, which went perfectly with the dressing. It tastes like spicy chicken wings in a cool dressing, he smiled and nodded. It's a secret recipe. After a moment of quiet, Christy felt the urge to ask him something. If you don't drive, do you go outside for more than your morning swim? He studied her for a moment before responding. I take a walk every day. I'll do it today after we finish the 4th chapter. Where do you walk? She asked. I walk along the lakefront road and back. It's about 6 miles. I have my gym clothes in my car. Can I join you today? She asked confidently. He looked into her eyes, which were filled with hope. He seemed unsure and hesitated a moment, but finally said, Okay. She looked around the room at all the pictures of Tyson and his wife, but lost count of them. You have so many photos, I can't believe how much you've changed. He glanced around and shrugged. The man in those pictures isn't here anymore. Everything he valued is gone. I'm just Tyson Kane now. Is math important? Tyson paused, then met her gaze, which dared him to take back his words. Let's finish the tutoring, he replied firmly. For the next 3 hours, they worked through 4 chapters in the textbook. Christy took careful notes and asked a lot of questions. He remained calm and patient, and she gradually relaxed. When they finished the last chapter, she closed her notebook with a pleased sigh. I have an extra chapter covered beyond what the university is teaching, and I understand the methods and formulas. I'm going to do great on the next test. I feel it. Thank you so much. He nodded at her but looked away, troubled by her smile. Are you ready to take your walk? Christy asked. He stood up and stretched. Yes, I just need to get changed. Let me put my books away and get my gym clothes, she said, jumping from her chair. She quickly packed her books into her bag and rushed outside. She switched bags in her car and returned with her gym duffel. "You can use the guest bathroom to change," he offered, and she went inside. Once the door was closed, she smiled to herself, feeling playful. He wouldn't know what to expect. Tyson watched the bathroom door close and wondered how he ended up in this situation. It was George's idea to send her his way. She was attractive, and her outfit suggested she took good care of herself. He frowned, reminding himself that she was young enough to be his daughter. Shaking that thought away, he went to his bedroom and put on his running gear. He wouldn't be running that day since his knee was bothering him, but he slipped on some comfortable socks. He returned to the living room, locked the patio doors, and grabbed his keys. He sat on the bench by the front door and put on his running shoes. He heard a sound and looked up. His jaw dropped, and he froze as she walked toward him. He noticed her colorful shoes next to her bare ankles. Her yoga pants fit closely, showing off her shape. They had bright patterns of parrot feathers from her ankles to just above her knees. Above that, the pattern changed to an orange, gold, and brown design that hugged her legs nicely. Her flat stomach was toned and visible from her waist up to the matching sports bra that fit her well. She smiled at him, clearly pleased by his surprised reaction, and her blonde hair was pulled back in a ponytail. That's quite an outfit," he managed to say. "Do you like it? This is the first time I've been able to wear it," she replied, running her hands over the fabric. Tyson felt a strange excitement he hadn't felt in years, and he felt uneasy about it, considering how young she was. "Yes, I mean, it looks nice. We should go," Tyson said, stumbling over his words as he tried to look elsewhere. She stepped outside with a satisfied smile, and he couldn't help but glance at her as she walked away. He noticed his own breathing change when he saw her walk. As he locked up, he caught her looking at him. Her cheeks turned red when she realized he noticed. Her eyes widened a bit when she saw something that made him uncomfortable. Tyson tried to breathe easy as they walked down the driveway to the road. He turned left, and Christy walked beside him. He looked at her cheerful face and felt confused. "This probably isn't as good a workout as the gym, plus you'd be showing off your new outfit to a younger crowd." She bit her lip, trying to hold back a smile at his comment, then shook her head as they picked up the pace. "The gym can get boring sometimes. Being outside feels refreshing, and honestly, you're more fit than anyone I've seen at the gym." He raised his eyebrows, surprised. She nodded, and he felt flattered but reminded himself of their age difference. "For someone who's nearly 60, you mean?" he suggested lightly. She raised her hands in protest. "No, you just look great. I don't see you as old at all." They continued walking in silence as he thought about what she said. He appreciated the compliment, but it also reminded him of the difference in their lives. They reached the end of the road where it used to lead to the town. They passed the place where the train tracks used to be. Tyson took a moment to think about how strange that night was. He could almost say it was a twist of fate, but he knew the facts showed it really happened. "Is this the spot?" Christy asked softly, glancing at him. He started to walk away from the crossing, heading east along the road, and she followed him. "Yes, they found me over there." He pointed to the spot nearby where his body had been after the accident. They paused by a large stone with Imani's name on it. She wasn't buried here, but the town wanted to remember her, so the stone was placed there. He continued walking. He picked up the pace to a light jog, wanting to move past the memories of the accident, and his knee felt okay. Christy jogged next to him, and he sensed her looking at him. He glanced over, and she gave him a kind smile. "Please don't." She was quiet for a moment. "Sorry." They kept jogging until he had to slow down because of the pain in his knee. "What's wrong with your knee?" she asked. "It needs to be fixed," he replied. "I hear that's a pretty simple surgery these days," she said. He nodded but did not reply. It wasn't the operation that bothered him, it was the thought of the trip to the hospital that made him feel uneasy. A therapist he spoke to said he could overcome that fear with help, but he hadn't gone back since he'd left. His life felt like it was on pause. "I could give you a ride if you want." "No, I don't. Drive or ride in cars," he said firmly. She fell silent again, and he tried not to look to see her reaction, but he finally glanced at her. It wasn't disappointment, it was pity, which felt worse. "Don't! I don't want your pity. I don't need it," he said sharply, though his voice wavered, showing his real feelings. He fell quiet. They walked along the road lined with trees, enjoying the peace of nature. "I guess if you had to choose your surroundings, you picked a nice place," Christy said calmly. He shot her an annoyed look, but she kept her gaze steady, challenging him to argue. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He tried to pick up his pace, but after a couple of steps he had to slow down again. His knee wouldn't cooperate. She stayed beside him, matching his pace, until they reached the end of the lakeside road and turned to head back along the water. Christy looked at the houses along the way with interest. "How much would it cost to buy one of those houses?" she finally asked. He laughed lightly. "You wouldn't find anyone willing to sell, even if they could." Seeing her curious expression, he continued his explanation. "The property tax is 0 because the land belongs to GRT. We cannot change the shape of the houses or add more floors. We aren't allowed to put down pavement for driveways. The houses are rented, so we can't sell them, but we can pass the lease to a family member. The original owners of GRT were old pioneers who valued family homes. So even with all the rules, we have a pretty good deal. However, there is a lot of money tied up in this land. The lease will end in about 60 years. At that point, one of two things could happen. GRT may ask everyone to leave and sell the land for a lot of money. Big mansions could replace these bungalows." "What's the other option?" she asked. "People say GRT will send a message to the town council by making another long lease with the current owners with the same rules," he replied, noticing the surprised look on her face. Things had been calmer between the council and GRT until the accident and the lawsuit. The council tried to take the land around the lake and the forest, but ended up getting a new road for a new neighborhood with their developer friends. This created more bad feelings between them and GRT. "So those houses I saw on the way in are mostly owned by members of the town council," he said with a serious look. They walked on as Christy appeared deep in thought. "Blake's mother is on the town council and his father is a real estate developer," she finally said. He noticed the worried look in her eyes and shrugged. It was better to know now than later after promises were made. When they returned to his place, Tyson's knee was really hurting. He shouldn't have jogged. He saw his neighbor, Mrs. Willoughby, working on her flowers by the gate. He remembered she liked to be called by her first name. "Good afternoon, Barbara." She looked up as they approached, and her smile widened when she saw Christy with him. "Good afternoon, Tyson. It's so nice to see you out with such lovely company." Tyson sighed as Barbara fussed over him. "This is Christy Taylor. She's studying at the university, and George asked me to help her with math. Christy, this is Barbara Willoughby, my neighbor." Christy and Barbara shook hands and smiled at each other. "It's so nice to hear you're teaching again," Barbara said with excitement. "He's a fantastic teacher. He helped me understand the chapters I was stuck on, and now I feel confident about my finals," Christy added happily. Tyson looked at both women with mild annoyance as they beamed at him. "I'm not going back to teaching. This is just a one-time thing," as a favor for George. Barbara gave him a knowing look. "Well, it would be a shame to let your talent go to waste." "That's my decision," he said firmly. The two women exchanged glances, and Tyson decided he was done with the conversation. "Good evening, Barbara," he said, turning to head up his driveway. He heard Christy finish her goodbyes and hurry after him. When he reached his front door, he held it open for her, glancing back to see Barbara watching them. He gave a polite wave, then stepped inside and locked the door. He heard Christy let out a contented sigh behind him. He turned to her, noticing her bright, relaxed smile. "What a night," he remarked with a chuckle, trying to lighten the mood. She smiled back. "It was nice, though, wasn't it? Good to catch up with people." He nodded, moving towards the kitchen to grab a glass of water, and Christy joined him, leaning casually against the counter. They chatted lightly about the evening, sharing a few laughs. After a pause, Christy looked at him thoughtfully. "You know, you're really easy to talk to," she said, sounding genuinely appreciative. Tyson smiled, feeling a little surprised. "Thanks. You're not too bad yourself," he joked, earning a laugh from her. They continued talking, the conversation flowing easily between them, and Tyson found himself enjoying the simple, quiet moments together. They both seemed to relax, the evening wrapping up with a warm, friendly atmosphere. With her, after sharing such an intense moment with Christy, Tyson felt drawn to reciprocate, a genuine urge to make her feel equally appreciated. Not letting himself hesitate, he took her hand and led her through the living room to the bedroom. They stopped by the bed, and he pulled her close, their lips meeting in a warm, lingering kiss. Christie's arms wrapped around him, and he felt her relax as they held each other. He gently knelt before her, helping her slip out of her shoes and tights as she leaned on the bed. With a tender look, he told her, "You're beautiful," which brought a shy smile to her face. They shared more quiet laughter and warm glances as he made sure she was comfortable, keeping his touch light and respectful. Tyson was attentive, listening to her reactions and taking cues from her to ensure she felt cared for and valued. As their connection grew, Christie responded with warmth and affection, clearly appreciating his gentle and caring approach. They spent a quiet, tender moment together, simply enjoying each other's company. When they finally lay side by side, they both felt a sense of closeness and peace, savoring the calm after their eventful evening. Her hand rested on his as they both shared a quiet, lingering moment of closeness. After a while, she leaned back, catching her breath as she calmed down. Tyson stood up, watching her rest, his thoughts swirling with sudden clarity. A voice in his head questioned what he was doing. This felt far removed from his usual, more reserved self. He had rarely acted on impulse, let alone in such an intense, immediate way. Now, here he was, sharing an intimate moment with someone he'd just met, feeling both surprised and conflicted. He thought about the differences between them: age, life experiences, even values. It was true he had been alone for several years since losing his wife. He wore his wedding band out of habit, but he'd never really thought about moving on. While he didn't owe his loyalty to anyone anymore, he felt a vague sense of guilt, as if he'd crossed a boundary he hadn't known was there. Is something wrong? He glanced over at her, noticing her warm, curious gaze as she rested on her elbows. He hesitated, unsure how to put his mixed feelings into words. I'm not sure why I acted this way," he admitted, feeling a bit lost in the moment. She gave him a reassuring smile. "Sometimes it's just about two people connecting without any expectations," she replied gently. "You think I'm interesting, and I think the same about you." Tyson nodded, somewhat comforted by her calm outlook. She didn't seem to expect anything more than what they'd shared: a brief connection, a moment without strings attached. Despite his conflicting thoughts, her words gave him a bit of peace. Trying to clear his mind, Tyson excused himself and headed to the bathroom to freshen up. He let the water run, hoping it would wash away his doubts. After a moment, he felt her hand on his shoulder, giving him a soft, understanding look. Tyson turned to her, ready to express his concerns, but instead, they shared a simple embrace, both content with the warmth and companionship they had found. In the end, Tyson realized he didn't need to overthink it. This was just a shared moment of kindness and understanding, a reminder that he could connect with others and appreciate those small, meaningful experiences. Tyson turned off the shower, lifted Christie, and gently wrapped her in a towel, helping her sit on the counter. He held her close, feeling a strong sense of connection as they took a moment to breathe and steady themselves. He looked at her, and she gave a reassuring smile, meeting his eyes. "Everything feels right, Tyson. Just be here with me," she said softly, easing his hesitation. They shared a warm embrace, and he realized he had been longing for this simple closeness, a moment without worries or complications. Tyson let himself enjoy the quiet bond they shared, feeling present and grounded. Christie's gaze was steady, full of warmth and understanding. She seemed to share his feelings, and together they experienced a deep sense of peace. Tyson found himself thankful for this connection, appreciating the comfort and acceptance they offered each other. In the silence that followed, they both smiled, feeling refreshed and content. The moment was calm and honest, a shared experience that left them both with a feeling of gratitude and ease. Her thoughts and feelings were so mixed up that all she could do was hold on to him tightly, bringing his face down to hers to give him a soft kiss. But the kisses felt like promises she wasn't sure she should be making, so she rested her forehead against his. Tyson felt the last bits of happiness slowly fading as he breathed heavily above the young woman. His body buzzed with energy, like it did after a tough workout, and he felt better than he had in a long time. He pulled back gently, and Christy let go of his head. He lowered her arms to rest on her chest, where his gaze lingered for a moment. He was still close to her, so he carefully moved back and stepped away. She gasped and caught her breath once he stood apart. He saw her face looked a bit swollen. He hoped he hadn't hurt her too much. She seemed dazed, so he carefully shifted to lift her into his arms. She sighed as her face rested against his shoulder. Tyson carried her into the bedroom. His mind was racing with something familiar. He laid her down on the bed, her hair fanned out over the pillow and her hands reached up to pull him down to her lips. The kiss was warm and filled with feeling, but also gentle. As he pulled back, his body started to tremble. Her blue eyes looked up at him, filled with concern as she noticed his shaking. His eyes widened in surprise. Ashley. She had been so young when they started their university journey, just as beautiful as ever. Why hadn't he seen it before? "Are you okay?" she asked softly. He couldn't find the words, so he just nodded, needing to catch his breath. Tyson found himself standing by the lake, the cool breeze giving him chills. He didn't know how he got there. She really is lovely. That familiar voice again. He looked up at the sky where dusk was starting to fall and realized she was early. Turning to the right, he saw Imani standing nearby, almost close enough to touch. He wanted to, but knew he shouldn't. The breeze lifted her hair from her face, and she looked at him with sad eyes. "The lake doesn't want you." He stepped back, her words feeling harsh. "The woman inside does?" He blinked in confusion, then turned his eyes toward the glass doors. Inside, wrapped in a comforter, was Christy. "What do—" He looked back at Imani, but she was gone. The fact that he had tried to speak to her shook him more than he wanted to admit. He shivered again and turned away from the dark waters. His legs moved him across the yard to the house, and his hands opened the door to lead him inside. Worried blue eyes met his brown ones. He felt the urge to share his thoughts and gave in. "She said the lake doesn't want me." Christy's gentle hands rested on his chest, feeling the coolness of his skin. She opened the comforter and pulled him close, sharing her warmth. They stood facing each other. "Who said that?" Christy asked. He looked into her eyes and saw kindness. He hesitated to answer, but deep down he felt that everything would be all right. "Imani." As she listened, a small smile appeared on her lips. "Smart lady. Can you tell me about her?" she asked, guiding him to the couch beside the little wood stove. He added another log to the fire and settled back under the quilt with Christy. He felt lighter and more at ease. He was ready to talk, and Christy listened. Tyson Kane felt like a changed man. That might be a bit much to say, but he felt like a man with a new knee that was finally starting to feel better. Without the constant ache, he sensed a new beginning. It didn't hurt that he enjoyed the company of a lovely young woman a few times a week. Christy Taylor had a busy life with her classes and a part-time job. Whenever she had some free moments, she'd visit him at his cottage by the lake. They had spent a lot of time together since that unexpected day last year when she had surprised him in his backyard. In one day, she transformed from a stranger to a friend and confidant. For someone so young, she had a powerful presence. She encouraged him to share things he had kept hidden, including the fact that he sometimes saw his late wife at night. After he confided this to her, the visits from Imani had become less frequent, though they hadn't completely stopped. Christy reassured him that it was okay to talk about it. She believed it might mean he had some feelings to work through regarding his wife, especially since their separation had been abrupt and during a disagreement. This made sense to him. If she had suggested anything strange or supernatural, he would have pushed it away. Tyson chuckled to himself. He could hardly believe he would turn away someone like Christy, who brought light into his life. She had shown him new ways of connecting, but he noted that her favorite moments were simple yet meaningful, sharing laughs in cozy spaces. Catching himself lost in thought, he shifted his focus to more everyday matters. He turned into his driveway after a walk along the lake, heading straight to his backyard and stopping at the water's edge. He realized how much he valued Christy's company. He understood that he had become quite withdrawn during the 5 years after the accident. A 59-year-old man and a 22-year-old woman didn't have much in common at first, but they found comfort in sharing their thoughts about current events, even if they often disagreed. He was learning to truly listen to her and understand her words, while she was also trying to understand him better. They would talk about their daily lives. She shared stories about hers, while his routine remained mostly the same day after day. Last year, Christy began helping him improve his living space with small changes he could accept. Over a month, he noticed that she had started putting photos of them in some of the frames around his house. The original pictures showed him and Imani, or just Imani. Christy kept some of his favorite pictures of Imani, but moved them around. She also included some cheerful photos of herself in more noticeable places. Christy also convinced him to go through a significant change. He had knee surgery. She helped him get to the hospital, and after a few days, he returned home, still feeling a bit sleepy from the medicine. Christy worked with his neighbor, Barbara Willoughby, to check on him frequently during his recovery. Later on, he saw pictures of Barbara in some frames and wondered who had moved them. His knee recovery took a while, but he was used to dealing with pain, so he kept going. Today, he was pleased to have walked 6 miles at a good pace with only a little discomfort in his knee. He had asked his doctor when he could start jogging again, but the doctor told him to sit still while he tested his knee. Jogging wasn't recommended yet, so for now, walking quickly would have to do, but he wanted to do more. The waves looked calm this morning. He had already gone swimming in the lake earlier. It was still his routine to swim out and back once, but now he didn't wait until he felt completely worn out before returning. Imani had told him the lake was not welcoming, and her words had scared and embarrassed him, making him cautious about pushing his limits in the cold water. Now he swam back just as he began to feel tired. He was done risking too much with the lake. With a sigh, he turned away from the beautiful blue water and went inside for a shower and breakfast. After that, he'd do another new thing that Christy encouraged him to try: checking in with his math friends on an online discussion board. It took a few weeks to get past all the surprised messages about him being alive, and then the condolences for his wife's passing before conversations about math could continue. Now he had a few regular friends he stayed in touch with. It wasn't the kind of lively chat most people loved, but he found it enjoyable. He had actually picked up a few good ideas that he was thinking about. He smiled as he walked in. He had a regular morning routine to keep up. Christy Taylor was having another moment of clarity. She was sitting in her car in the coffee shop parking lot, letting her thoughts flow. She had learned to give herself time to think about new ideas and different views. It was another lesson from Tyson. This morning she felt thankful for many things, but not material ones. Tyson had taught her to keep feelings for people separate from things. It made feelings feel more genuine. He never pushed his views on her. It was just how he chose to live, and it made sense to her too. She wasn't looking forward to telling Tyson she would be leaving town. She had a new opportunity in New York City. There, she would finish her studies and start her job with a well-known fashion brand. It felt like a big step forward. She knew Tyson would be happy for her, but also sad about her leaving. She worried about him. He wasn't ready to be on his own and was still trapped by his fears. He couldn't ride in a car and had only managed to sit in hers for a few moments with the door open. She sighed, realizing she needed to find someone to keep him company. That way she could leave feeling less anxious. Barbara was an option, but he found her too pushy, and he was right about that. Barbara was very overbearing. Maybe that was why her own children rarely came by to visit. Christy went through her list of friends, trying to figure out who might spend time with Tyson to help him overcome his fears. Sadly, most of them had steady boyfriends who were uncomfortable with their partners being around someone as attractive as Tyson. She shifted in her seat, thinking about their last date. It would not be easy to find someone new like him. She pushed those thoughts away and returned to her friends. There was Rachel, who had just broken up with Chris, after a rocky relationship filled with ups and downs. Rachel was a bit too dramatic, and Tyson didn't need that. Neither did Chris. But if he took Rachel back, that was on them. Then she thought of Jillian. She wasn't seeing anyone right now. She remembered their talk about Jillian's last boyfriend and her issues with men. Maybe dating someone who reminded her of her father would be too complicated. Jillian thought she would enjoy it, but she realized calling Tyson a special name during an intimate moment might cause problems. So, Jillian stepped back. Miranda was starting to date Vince, but it felt new and uncertain. Christy didn't trust him. He was friends with Blake, and after spending time with Tyson, she saw her ex-fiance for who he really was. She doubted Vince would be any different. Christy thought Miranda and Tyson might be a good fit. Miranda was outgoing and positive, which could help Tyson open up. However, some of Christy's other friends found Miranda a bit too much. In reality, Miranda just struggled with some social situations. Tyson's kind nature could be just what she needed to build her confidence. Miranda was of Mexican descent, born in America. She was shorter than Christy, with beautiful caramel skin, warm brown eyes, and long hair. Miranda often joked about her round figure, feeling it didn't look like her friends. Yet she was fit and had strong legs from her love of cycling. She sometimes joked that Christy got all the attention for her looks. These comments often made Christy's other friends uncomfortable, but Christy simply found them amusing, just what Tyson needed. Christy started her car and drove toward her neighborhood, taking a side street just before her home. Miranda lived with her parents in a nice house nearby. She was the oldest sibling, with an 18-year-old brother, Raul Jr., and a 16-year-old sister, Natalie. Christy, being an only child, envied Miranda's siblings, though she hadn't shared that with her own parents. Miranda's dad was a successful stockbroker, and her mom had her own business. Christy heard Miranda mention that Raul just got a new truck for his birthday, and he wanted to take Christy for a drive sometime. Miranda found it hilarious because Raul thought he was quite charming. Parked, she walked up to the door and rang the bell. Moments later, Raul Jr. greeted her with a broad smile. "Good morning, Christy. You look lovely today," he said with a youthful enthusiasm. Christy smiled back, raising an eyebrow. "Good morning, Raul. You should save those compliments for your dates." "Christy, ignore that guy and come back to the kitchen," Miranda called from the other room. Raul looked deep into Christy's blue eyes and bright smile, thinking about her words. She could sense he might be wondering if she thought he was attractive enough to date more than one person. As she walked past the fit young man, she guessed he'd spent many hours at the gym. Perhaps that contributed to his overconfident attitude. She entered the kitchen, aware that Raul was watching her. "Junior, stop staring at my friend! Don't be so immature!" Miranda scolded, drawing Christy's attention. "I'm not! And don't call me Junior!" he retorted. Trying to regain his cool, he added, "Besides, women like it when a guy shows he appreciates them." Christy frowned, shaking her head to indicate he was mistaken, and he looked embarrassed. "I can introduce you to someone who really knows how to treat a woman right," she suggested. Raul's smile returned. "Is this the secret boyfriend you never want to show us? The perfect guy?" Miranda asked, her tone sharper than she intended. Concerned for her friend, Christy turned to Raul. "Can we have a moment alone?" she asked kindly, and he nodded, recognizing that his sister was upset. Miranda took Christy's hand. "Never mind, let's go to my room." Christy followed her upstairs to her cozy room. When Miranda closed the door, her eyes filled with tears. Christy opened her arms and Miranda hugged her tightly as the tears flowed. "What happened?" Christy asked gently as Miranda's tears began to subside. Miranda's sadness turned into anger. "Vince is really awful." Christy was not surprised to hear this, but kept her expression neutral. "What did he do?" "The day after we were together, he broke up with me in a text, and then he posted a picture of us with a cruel caption." "What?" Christy exclaimed in disbelief. "Eventually he took it down, but by then everyone had seen it. It was so embarrassing." Miranda started crying again. Christy felt anger boil within her as she comforted her friend. If she could get a screenshot of the post before it was taken down, she would definitely make sure the school administration knew about it. Getting Vince removed from the university for this would be a good step. She was determined to make it happen. Miranda composed herself and looked at her friend with a fierce determination. "That's it! No more dating until I graduate. There are no decent guys at this university." Christy smiled and nodded, feeling hopeful for her friend. "Does that mean you might be able to check in on a friend of mine from time to time?" Miranda wiped her eyes with a tissue and looked at Christy, confused. "A friend?" "Tyson Kane." Miranda's confusion deepened. "Wait, I know that name." Christy sighed. The train incident. Yes, that's right. He stopped the train. Oh, his wife died and he got hurt. You've been helping him recover? Miranda gasped. An image of Tyson popped into her mind and her cheeks turned warm. Not exactly. He was mostly better by the time I visited him for math tutoring. She shook her head to refocus. He lost his wife in that accident, and he barely made it through himself. He's been really shaken up by what happened and still struggles with anxiety. I've been trying to get him to come into town, but he can't sit in a car without stress. I had to help calm him down a lot to bring him in for knee surgery. Miranda looked at her in surprise. This was a whole new side of her friend. A big smile spread across her face. What? Christy asked, sounding unsure. You keep surprising me, Miss Taylor, she giggled. Christy shook her head, confused. Your kindness is really inspiring. Whoa, don't go calling me a hero. I went there to get help with my math work. He's an amazing teacher. In just one day, he cleared up all my problems. I was so thankful. I wanted to do something nice for him in return. He's an all-around great person. Miranda just smiled and nodded with a proud grin. Christy cleared her throat and gave her friend a hopeful look. You know I'm leaving soon. I'd feel a lot better knowing someone would check in on him a few times a week. Get him moving around? Miranda suggested. Christy nodded. He swims in the lake in the morning and takes a long walk afterward. He also works out at home. Miranda looked impressed. So, he knows how important it is to stay active. Christy smiled. Oh, absolutely. Sure, I can help with that. Where is he? Miranda said, and Christy hugged her, excited. Give me your phone and I'll add his details, Christy said. Miranda handed it over while Christy pulled up the information on her phone. He lives by the lake? Lucky guy. How did he end up in such a nice place? Miranda asked, grinning. Christy gave her a tired look. The homes there stay in the family, so he got it from his parents when they passed away. She finished entering Tyson's information into Miranda's phone. Miranda looked a bit sorry for her earlier comment. Christy's phone chimed from a text. She quickly read it. Ah, it's my mom. I was supposed to meet her and my aunt at the club. I have to go. She quickly replied, saying she was almost there. Then she took hold of Miranda's arms and looked into her eyes. I'm really sorry about Vince. He's not the brightest, and he will face his own problems. I also want to thank you for checking on Tyson. Trust me, you won't regret it. He's a great guy. She jumped to her feet and hurried downstairs, needing to get across town in 5 minutes. That was easy when you drive fast. Miranda watched her friend dash away, surprised. She wondered what exciting things were happening in her friend's life. She wasn't jealous of her friend. Well, maybe a little. Looking at her phone, she decided to take her bike on the new trail to see him tomorrow. Miranda had heard about 2 students who caused a lot of trouble and what happened to them at a train crossing when their stolen vehicle collided with Tyson Kane's car, which led to a tragic loss. Feeling curious, she picked up her tablet and searched for the story. After a while, she found information about Tyson himself. Wow, he's a big guy, she said quietly, looking at a photo of the professor at a university event. He was standing with a slim woman, making him appear even larger. The woman was very pretty, and her skin tone matched Miranda's. Tyson looked genuinely happy. Losing this woman must have been really tough for him. If Christy believed he was a good man, Miranda was eager to meet him. She smiled to herself, thinking he seemed like a big teddy bear. After what Vince had put her through, she could definitely use a comforting hug. The lake water felt warmer than usual as Tyson swam with a steady stroke. He could feel himself getting better each time and thought he was swimming a little farther before turning back. He was careful not to push himself too much. He had very little body fat, so he needed to keep moving. Looking up, he saw the bright blue sky, promising a nice day. He decided some sunbathing would be nice. As he turned back, he spotted Barbara's house with its rooftop deck and noticed the sun shining on her binoculars. Barbara had always been protective of him, watching over him for years, especially when he struggled to reach the shore before Imani encouraged him to take a break. No. Christy's presence was what made him realize he had something to live for. Imani was gone. Despite any strange thoughts he might have, she was no longer with him. Christy had made him aware of how Barbara had quietly supported him. The young woman had mentioned hearing his neighbor's kind words the first morning she saw him come out of the water with difficulty, so his neighbor had a good view of his yard from her roof with her binoculars. He kept swimming strongly, thinking about it. He sighed softly. Tyson wasn't going to change his ways for anyone. He swam and sunbathed without clothes, and that wasn't going to change. He decided to ignore the chance that someone might see him. The water was getting warmer, and he knew he was nearing the shallow part of the shore. His swim was done, but he felt strong. He stood up in the water and took a deep breath to fill his lungs and energize his muscles. He planned to swim further the next day. Turning around, he admired his cozy home. He truly loved it there. The morning sun felt nice, so he tilted his face to it, closed his eyes, and ran his hands through his hair to get the water out. He noticed his hair was getting long. His curls were growing so much that he was starting to look like Imani. He walked out of the water and onto his lawn, stretching his arms high and bending side to side. A loud scream jolted him, and he opened his eyes to see a young woman staring at him in shock, covering her mouth with her hands. She was dressed in a bright, tight outfit, but before he could see her clearly, she turned and hurried away along the path beside his house. Tyson thought he might need to lock the gate or put up a bigger sign warning that it was private property. Meanwhile, Miranda rode her bicycle along the scenic path, her thoughts racing. What had she just witnessed? She finally stopped at a small rest area with benches, took a sip of water, and sat down. Christy hadn't mentioned Tyson's family living with him. Maybe he had a cousin? She remembered reading that he was an only child, so the handsome man she had just seen could not be a younger brother. She had noticed a family resemblance before her eyes became fixated on him. The scream had startled her too. She patted her cheeks to shake off her surprise. It would take a while to forget that image. Getting back on her bicycle, she continued pedaling. She needed to talk to Christy about her plans, as there seemed to be a new complication. "Good morning, Tyson," Christy called out after breakfast. "Hey, Christy, how are you today?" he replied cheerfully. She smiled, enjoying the sound of happiness in his voice, but then she remembered why she called, and her smile faded slightly. "I was wondering if I could come to see you this afternoon." "Of course, you know I'll make time for you," he joked lightly. "Will you stay for dinner?" Even though his voice was casual, she sensed a bit of hope in it. Her heart felt a little uneasy. "Not today," she said gently. "That's okay. By the way, do you remember your first visit to my home?" he asked. The change in topic surprised her, but her smile returned. "How could I forget that day?" He laughed at her excitement. "This morning I had another young woman surprise me in my backyard, and she screamed and ran off." Christy thought he sounded a bit anxious. "What did she look like?" she asked, guessing who it might be. She had her hands over her face, but she had beautiful brown eyes, long brown hair in a braid, and she was wearing something form-fitting with unusual shoes. "That sounds like my friend Miranda Moreno. She enjoys cycling on country roads. I mentioned to her that we were friends and I visited you at the lake, but I didn't know she would come by today." "You told her about us?" Tyson asked, sounding curious. "Just that we were friends. I was careful with my words," she replied with a smile. "Well, I think I didn't make a good first impression," he sighed. Christy couldn't help but giggle. "I wouldn't say that." "You didn't scream." Her giggles turned into laughter. "True, but that was because I wanted to prove you were who you said you were." Tyson laughed at the memory. "Right. You're pretty tough." "I'll talk to her. It'll be okay. She was probably just surprised," Christy assured him. "Should I get a lock for the gate or a bigger sign?" he asked. "Is that what the sign says? I thought it said something funny," she said, bursting into giggles. He chuckled. "All right, miss. Smarty pants. I'll see you this afternoon. Bye." "Bye." Christy hung up and quickly went to her car. She had to find Miranda. She could have walked, but she knew of a few places Miranda might be if she wasn't home. When she rang the doorbell, Raoul Jr. answered with a bright smile. "2 days in a row! It's feast or famine with you," he joked. She smiled back. He was quite charming. "I'm looking for Miranda," she replied sweetly. He sighed dramatically. "One day, I hope you'll come just for me." She laughed and raised an eyebrow. "Not today." Raoul stepped back and motioned for her to go upstairs. "She just got back from her ride. She's in her room." Christy smiled and climbed the stairs, feeling his gaze follow her. "Staring at me won't help your chances." She heard him make a sound of frustration before reaching her friend's door. She knocked lightly. "Miranda, it's Christy." She heard a faint squeak and some noises from inside. "1 second," Miranda called from behind the door. Christy waited, trying not to think about the strange buzzing sound coming from within. The door opened, and Miranda stepped into the hallway, her cheeks a bit red. "Let's go sit on the patio. It's a beautiful day," she suggested quickly. Christy could still hear the buzzing noise coming from inside. "Are you sure you don't want to turn that off first?" she asked carefully. Miranda's shoulders dropped and she sighed. "Okay, can you help me move the bed?" They went inside and shifted the bed away from the wall so Miranda could reach her personal item that had somehow fallen between the mattress and the wall. She turned it off and put it in the drawer of her bedside table. After they pushed the bed back, they sat facing each other. Miranda's face looked flushed. "I hear you had an interesting visit at Tyson's this morning," Christy started. Miranda's eyes widened. "You didn't tell me Tyson had family living with him? A nudist family at that?" she exclaimed. "Oh, you saw him without clothes?" Christy said with a big smile. She was enjoying this moment. "Saw him? He walked out of the lake like he was some kind of angel. He's beautiful." Miranda sighed. "Who is he? Tyson's younger cousin?" Christy laughed, and Miranda couldn't help but smile at the happy sound. "Miranda, that was Tyson." The lovely brunette's smile disappeared as she looked confused. "No, Mr. Kane is almost 60. This man couldn't be more than mid-40s, maybe late 30s. Tyson lives alone. The man you saw walking out of the lake was him. He swims every day." She took a breath and gently held Miranda's hand. "Listen, he went through a lot after the accident. He pushed himself hard with exercise. He lost a lot of weight and built up his muscles. He's still very serious about working out." Miranda stared at Christy, her eyes widening with understanding. "It's him! He's your mystery friend," she gasped. Christy smiled softly. "Friend is a better word. We care for each other, but there's no romantic love between us." "But you're close with him." Christy's smile grew as she nodded. "Tyson's amazing." Miranda squealed in excitement as Christy confirmed her guess. Christy raised her hands to calm her friend. "That information is just between us. Tyson wasn't looking for anything like that at first. He was very private when we met. He didn't want me in his yard. He didn't want to tutor me or let me join him on his walks. I really had to push to get close to him. He had a big concern about our age difference, but honestly, it didn't bother me because he's so charming." Miranda thought about Christy's request for her to check in on Tyson. "Did you expect me to become close with Tyson too?" Christy looked at her surprised. "No, oh my gosh, no, I just wanted someone to help Tyson feel less isolated. He needs someone to talk to in person. Once you get to know him, if you decide you want to start a romantic relationship, you'll need to talk to him about it. He's a great guy, but if I hadn't brought it up, nothing would have happened. He's really polite." She smiled warmly. Miranda listened thoughtfully to everything she had learned. She realized it was too soon after Vince to find another boyfriend, and honestly, she could use some time off from dating. Having someone to talk to might be nice. An idea suddenly came to her. "You said he loves working out, right?" she asked. Christy nodded, and Miranda jumped off the bed, pulling her friend with her. They hurried downstairs and out to the backyard toward the big garage at the end of the driveway. Inside, Miranda took Christy upstairs to the loft, where they spotted several old bicycles hanging from the ceiling. Turning to her friend, she said, "We can fix up one of these old bikes for him so he can join me on my rides," Miranda exclaimed excitedly. Christy thought it was a clever idea, but doubted the bikes would work for Tyson. He might be too strong for them. However, getting him a new bike, something that would fit him and be sturdy enough, was a brilliant thought. It would help him stay active, and it would give him a chance to explore beyond his neighborhood. Plus, it would encourage Miranda to spend more time with him, too. "Miranda, you're really smart, but we need to think bigger. Can you take me to the best bike shop right now?" she asked eagerly. Miranda felt the excitement and quickly nodded. "I know just the place." Tyson heard the sound of tires on the gravel in his driveway and smiled. Christy must be here. Then he heard a second set of crunching sounds. A second car? He checked the oven to make sure everything was fine, then walked to the door to open it. Parked far from the door was Christie's sporty white car. She was getting out with a big smile. In the spot closer to the house, a blue pickup truck was coming to a stop. He recognized the pretty brunette from that morning. She was looking at him with wide eyes and a friendly smile. The truck's engine turned off, and the lovely brunette stepped out, wearing a new outfit and sneakers this time. On the other side of the pickup was a tall, handsome young man who seemed to resemble her. He smiled with amusement as Tyson stood on the steps wearing an apron, shorts that were probably hard to see, and sandals. "Do you greet all your visitors in just an apron?" Christie called out, her voice cheerful. Tyson lifted the apron to show his shorts, making Christie gasp in surprise, likely thinking he was not dressed underneath. "You know I don't have any visitors except you and George. Besides, I was baking cookies," he explained. By now, Christie was next to another woman. "Tyson, this is my good friend Miranda Moreno, and this young man is her brother, Raul Jr." Tyson quickly noticed that Raul liked being called handsome, but he was less pleased about being called young or junior. "Hello, Miranda, Raul." He received a bright smile from Miranda and a polite smile from Raul, though Raul seemed slightly amused. Maybe he didn't think men should wear aprons. "I'm very sorry I came into your backyard without asking this morning," Miranda said seriously. Tyson waved his hand casually. "Would you like a freshly baked shortbread cookie?" "Ooh, the charming man is inviting us in with treats. What could possibly go wrong?" Christie joked as she linked arms with Miranda. Tyson stepped back and held the door open for them. The women walked in and Raul paused just inside, looking annoyed. As Christie showed Miranda around, he glanced back at Tyson, who raised an eyebrow in question. "How can she call you charming when you're dressed to cook?" Raul said, sounding a bit critical. "Dressed to cook? Who told you that nonsense?" Tyson replied with a grin as he walked into the kitchen. He picked up a warm cookie from the oven and handed it to Raul. Raul took a bite and nodded, enjoying the taste as it melted in his mouth. Tyson then offered the plate of cookies to the ladies, who each took one. "Oh, this is so good," Christie exclaimed as she came closer. "Thank you for the treats." She leaned in, and Tyson felt a little shy, but his fondness for her made him kiss her back until she smiled and stepped away. Raul stared at her in surprise. "What? He's a kind guy, a great cook, keeps a tidy home, and is quite charming," Christie explained. "Those are things a woman would care about." Raul started to respond heatedly. "Seriously, where did you get the idea that certain jobs should be for only one gender? I thought I was the one with old-fashioned views. You make me feel young by comparison." Raul looked at him with curiosity. "How old are you?" 59. "What?" Raul turned to look at Christie in disbelief. "You're dating an older man?" Tyson glanced at Miranda, who was still watching him. "What does that mean?" "It means grandfather," she said softly. Tyson wanted to feel upset, but he understood what Raul was saying. He still didn't know why Christie liked him. He shrugged. "I might be old enough to be a grandfather, but I don't have kids or grandkids. That ship has sailed for me," he said with a hint of sadness. Raul continued. He turned to Christie, who watched him with a small smile. "I don't get it. I'm strong and, as you said, good-looking. What does he have that I don't?" "I can bake cookies," Tyson said with a grin. "Hey, I will show you how to make chocolate chip cookies. Everyone loves them, and if you make them, you'll earn some big points." "My friends at the gym would make fun of me," Raul replied, sounding upset. Christie exchanged a concerned glance with Miranda. "Looks like we found the source of Raul's tough attitude." "Tough? Being strong isn't bad," he shot back. "No, but when mixed with the way you treat women, it can be. You're smart and can improve," Christie said straightforwardly. Raul looked back at Tyson. "All right, you teach me to bake can't hurt," he said. The women seemed pleased, sensing a change in his mood. "If you can win against me in arm wrestling." Tyson blinked at the confident young man. He knew this might be a challenge, but he was no stranger to hard work. "Okay, fine," Tyson said, taking off his apron. Raul's eyes widened slightly. "You can take off your shirt too if that makes you comfortable," Tyson suggested. Moments later, Raul was without his shirt. He wasn't as broad as Tyson, but had lean muscles. Christie nodded in approval, and Raul's smile showed his confidence. Tyson moved to the kitchen island and set his elbow down. Raoul gripped his hand, and they held onto the countertop with their other hands. Christy placed her hand on top of theirs. When I lift my hand, you start. Ready? They nodded. Go! Immediately, Tyson felt the effort in his hand, arm, and back. Raoul was very strong, but a bit too sure of himself. Looking deep into Raoul's eyes, Tyson smiled and started to push harder. The effort increased, but he kept applying pressure. The confident look in Raoul's eyes changed to surprise, and then worry. Tyson's grin widened as he held Raoul's gaze. Arm wrestling isn't just about strength. It's also about how much you can handle. How much pain have you felt in your young life, Raoul? The younger man shook his head and flinched as Tyson's grip tightened. Are you ready to be serious? Tyson asked quietly, and Raoul tried to hide his surprise as his arm was pushed back. When he was bent at an awkward angle, he yelped and jumped away, releasing Tyson's hand. Raoul shook his hand to get the blood flowing again. Wow, for an older guy, you're really strong, he exclaimed. Raoul, Miranda scolded, but Tyson just laughed. Christy smiled at the teacher. How many arm wrestling matches have you won? Tyson smiled shyly as he massaged his arm. That was the first time I've ever done that, maybe the last. This kid puts up a fight. Raoul looked at him in surprise, feeling proud. Don't tell him that. He'll get a big head, Miranda said with a sigh. Tyson shook his head, still grinning at Raoul. Come on, let's get started on the cookies. Put your shirt back on. He tied on his apron again. Raoul put his shirt back on and frowned. It's hard to take you seriously in that. I'll admit it looked better on my wife, but if you've ever tried to cook bacon without a shirt, you'd understand. He looked at Raoul seriously. Never try it without clothes. That got a laugh from the others. Besides, you know what it takes to wear this comfortably? The younger man didn't want to look confused, but he clearly had no idea. Confidence. People notice that. It's not the same as being boastful or arrogant. Confidence is about being at ease with yourself. Being a man is about what's inside, not just what's outside. Raoul smiled and nodded. Let's make cookies. Christy and Miranda sat at the counter watching the two men make chocolate chip cookies from scratch. Tyson guided Raoul and let him do most of the work. When the cookies came out of the oven and had cooled enough to eat, the ladies cheered for Raoul's first successful baking attempt. Raoul beamed at Tyson as he enjoyed Christy's praise. What do you do for a living? Tyson shook his head. I'm retired. But what did you do before? Raoul pressed. Tyson sighed. I was a math teacher. No way? You're a math whiz? Raoul chuckled. Christy moved over to lean against Tyson as she looked at Raoul. Certified genius-level math whiz, she said playfully. Tyson chuckled and gave her a quick kiss. You say the nicest things. He turned to Raoul, who was still getting used to Christy being affectionate with him. If you're so smart, why aren't you teaching now? Raoul asked, sounding a bit aggressive. Tyson's smile faded. People keep saying that, and I keep telling them I'm done with that. He's dealing with past struggles, you know, Miranda snapped. Raoul looked at him in surprise. Tyson shot a serious look at Christy. You've been talking about me with others? He asked sharply. Christy met his gaze and nodded. Miranda had a great idea, and we are here to make it happen. Tyson was caught off guard by her confidence when he expected her to be defensive. Idea? Come outside, Christy said with a big smile, and Tyson found himself following her excitement again. Miranda stood behind them, beaming, while her brother furrowed his brow. Once back in the driveway, Raoul pulled back the cover from the pickup truck. He revealed a road bicycle. It had a shiny silver frame with bright yellow-green stripes and black wheels. Raoul lifted it out, and Miranda took it from him. She and Christy walked it over to Tyson. Then, Raoul pulled back another cover and revealed another bicycle. Tyson focused on the two women as they turned the silver bike around so he could see it better. Christy bought you a bicycle! Miranda cheered. Tyson's eyes widened and he looked at the beautiful bike. It's stunning! It looks fast even when it's standing still, he said. Do you know how to ride a bicycle? Raoul asked, and the ladies' faces fell as they realized he might not. Tyson chuckled at their worried expressions. Yes, I do, but it's been a while, and I don't see any gear shifters on this one. Miranda sighed in relief as she pointed out that the brake levers could also shift gears. Tyson held Christy's hand and looked into her eyes. "Thank you. This is very kind of you." He admired the sleek bike again. "It's not a car, it feels different. You get exercise while riding it. You can travel faster and farther compared to walking. Getting to town is now easier," Christy explained. "I was set on getting you a car, but Miranda suggested a bicycle. She loves cycling, so she had a fresh perspective. I hope you don't mind I talked with her." Tyson watched Christy and realized she seemed anxious. Oh. Now he understood why she was doing this. She was planning to leave. They had discussed it before as something for later, but it seemed that later was here sooner than expected. He glanced at the other two. "Can you give us a moment?" When Miranda nodded, he gently led Christy aside. "When do you leave?" he asked softly. She took a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "The end of next week." He nodded, feeling a tug in his stomach. "This is a big chance for you?" She nodded, and tears started to well in her eyes. "Hey, no tears. We knew this day would come, and it's okay. We'll always be good friends. I'll support you in whatever you decide to do." He glanced at Miranda, feeling like he understood more of the situation. "Did you ask your friend to look after me?" he asked. Christy sniffed. "It's more like you can help each other. My other friends might not stay in touch with her once I'm gone. They don't understand her like I do, and she makes them uneasy. She could use a friend to help her feel better. She doesn't make good choices in boyfriends and has had some tough experiences lately." She sighed. "She rides alone, and I worry about that. She should ride with others. Could you join her on a bike ride sometimes? I hope you like biking." He felt relieved he wasn't just someone to pity. "I love biking, thank you. I'll definitely ride, and if it helps me get out more, that's great." "Good, because I have more surprises," she said with excitement and rushed to her car. She returned quickly with a couple of bags. Inside one of the bags was a bike helmet. It was shiny black with lots of ventilation holes, decorated on the sides with yellow-green stripes. "Will this fit with all my hair?" he asked. "Maybe I should cut it like before." "No!" both Christy and Miranda said, then burst into laughter. Christy caught her breath first. "Your hair looks amazing with your new style. Keep it long, please," she said playfully. He sighed. Pushing his hair back, he managed to put on the helmet, but his hair was loose on his back. Miranda came forward and gathered his hair together. "You should tie it back before putting the helmet on." "Right, good idea." He noticed she was still holding his hair. "You can let go now," he said with a smile. She smiled back, a bit shy, and stepped back. Next, Christy pulled out black biking shorts, black socks, and a black cycling jersey from the shopping bag. She handed him the jersey, and he lifted it. Tyson laughed joyfully as the shirt was completely black with math problems printed all over it like chalk doodles. "A math-themed cycling shirt, this is amazing!" Christy and Miranda smiled widely, sharing in the joy. "Go put them on," Christy said. "Nothing goes under the cycling pants," Miranda insisted, her face turning bright red. He took off the helmet and left it with Miranda, then carried his clothes into the house. In his bedroom, he changed into the bike shorts. They fit snugly. The padding felt strange, like he was wearing something extra soft. He put on the jersey, which was also form-fitting but didn't stop him from moving freely. He looked in the mirror at his long hair. It was as long as Imani's had been. He went to her dresser and opened the top drawer. Inside were her hair ties. He picked a white one and tried to pull his hair back. It looked good enough. At the front door, he put on new socks and then his sneakers. He didn't have the cool shoes that Miranda had. As he stepped outside, he heard Christy's playful whistle. "The pants could be a little less tight," he said, half joking. "No, they're just right," Christy replied with a smile. She joined him at the bottom of the stairs and gently patted his chest, admiring how he wore the jersey. "Listen, I have to go, but I'd love to visit this weekend. Saturday afternoon to Sunday afternoon?" He smiled back. "Sure, that sounds great." He thought it might be their last time together, so he planned to make her a nice meal and tidy up first. Christy leaned in for a quick kiss, and he lost himself in the moment. Raoul made a noise nearby, breaking the spell. Tyson pulled back to see Christy smiling at him before she turned to talk to Miranda. Moments later, Christy was laughing as she headed towards her car. As her white coupe left the driveway, Tyson noticed Miranda watching him with bright eyes. He sensed that his excitement from the kiss was noticeable. He closed his eyes, trying to calm himself. "I've got things to do, too. Are you staying here, sis?" Raoul asked, sounding a bit impatient. "Yes, I want to make sure Tyson's bicycle is ready. Maybe we can go for a ride?" she said, looking hopeful. He nodded, and her smile grew wider. "It was nice meeting you, Raoul," Tyson said, waving. The young man smiled and nodded back. "Yeah, nice meeting you too. Take care." Miranda and Tyson watched Raoul drive out of the gravel lot, then they walked over to the bicycles. "You don't have special cycling shoes yet, so they installed basic platform pedals, which will work with your regular shoes. You should think about getting cycling shoes soon. They help with better power transfer." She had him sit on the saddle while he leaned against the house. She raised the seat, adjusted it slightly, and tightened everything up. "When you get the new shoes and pedals, we can adjust the positioning again. For now, this is good." She glanced at him and he nodded, feeling comfortable. "Would you like to go for a ride now?" she asked. "Sure. I just need to lock up the house." Tyson went inside to get his wallet, keys, and phone. He found a pocket on the back of his jersey and tucked his things in there after locking the door. Putting on the helmet was much easier now that his hair was managed. He pulled on the gloves last and thought he looked pretty cool in his new outfit. As they walked their bikes over the gravel to the road, Tyson smiled nervously at Miranda. "I used to ride bikes all the time when I was a kid, and when I lived in Europe, everyone rode bikes. So I started again, but it's been years since I've ridden one. This feels a bit challenging. Why don't we just take it slow and get used to the gears and brakes as we ride east along the road?" she suggested. He nodded and swung his leg over the bike. It didn't take Tyson long to find his balance on the new bicycle. It rolled smoothly, and steering felt easy. Miranda gave him tips on using the gears best for the road and the slope. He figured out how to shift gears and, most importantly, how to use the brakes safely so he wouldn't tip forward. They continued east along the road by the lake, picking up speed until they were racing along. It all felt so natural. Christy had been right. Biking was very different from driving. It didn't trigger his past worries at all. He was enjoying himself. Before long, they reached the end of the road where the new road into town began. He noticed Miranda's eager look, took a deep breath, and nodded. She smiled widely and turned left, heading north. He followed close behind her. "Are we going to take the trail or stay on the road?" he asked. "Would you mind if we stayed on the road?" she asked, and he shook his head. "Either is fine with me," he replied. "Road, then." Seeing no traffic on the trail, they rode over a small bump and continued along the smooth road. The pavement rolled easily beneath them, and as they rode, they talked. Most of the conversation was her sharing stories about group rides she had been part of. She mentioned that she didn't ride competitively, but enjoyed the friendships from riding with others. She had tried joining a local cycling club, but found them to be rather exclusive. Miranda looked at him again with hope. "I'm hoping you'll come to love cycling enough that we could start a cycling group together." He laughed. "So far, so good. This is awesome." Her smile was bright. Tyson finally saw the small square object attached to her helmet. His helmet didn't have one. "What's that on your helmet?" "Oh, it's a video camera. I sometimes record my rides," she said. "Is it on now?" "No, I always ask before recording someone. I wasn't sure if you'd mind," she said shyly. "If you want to record, go ahead," he replied. She smiled widely. "This part is so flat and straight that I'll wait to record until we turn back. The original country road has much more to see." Tyson thought about that road and remembered the last time he was there. An uneasy feeling crept in as he thought about the return trip. He focused on riding and felt better. Cycling was so different from driving, which helped ease his worries. He looked forward to feeling the bike move along the rolling and winding road. Soon, Tyson noticed they were nearing the town. He felt a thrill knowing he was doing this without being heavily sedated like last time. His visit was for surgery, which had been tough. He looked around and noticed some new shops. The area had changed a lot, and things were different than he remembered. Sometimes change wasn't always a good thing. "Hey, an ice cream shop!" he exclaimed. Hearing his excitement, Miranda unclipped her pedals, slowed down, and got off her bike. She walked it over to the outdoor tables as Tyson hurried to catch up. "My treat," Tyson said with a smile. "What do you want?" "A single scoop of chocolate, thank you," she replied with a grin as she took a seat at one of the tables. They had the patio all to themselves. Excitedly, Tyson leaned his bike against a table and raced off to the shop. Miranda felt a flutter of joy. Tyson seemed to really enjoy the ride, which was a good sign for her idea of starting a cycling group. She would be happy even if it ended up just being the two of them. As she thought of being alone with Tyson, she recalled something Christy had mentioned. Did he really? A movement caught her eye. Blake Carlington was parking his car nearby. She noticed him checking to see if she was by herself, and she felt uneasy. She turned on her helmet camera just in case. "Where's Christy?" he asked sharply. Miranda didn't like Blake. He reminded her too much of someone who had made her uncomfortable in the past. "I don't know," she replied calmly. "My friend at the bike shop told me Christy spent a lot on a silver Cannondale racing bike, and here it is," he said, stepping out of his car. "This just shows what a liar you are. First, you talked about Vince, and now this." He reached out to touch the bike. "Don't, you can't touch that. Just like you can't touch Christy." She noticed Blake's anger grow as he stared at her. "Watch how you talk to me. Maybe I should teach you some respect." He moved closer, and she suddenly wished she could be more careful with her words. "Hey, step back right now!" Tyson's deep voice broke the tense moment, and Miranda felt a wave of relief wash over her. "Mind your own business, oh!" Blake growled, turning to see Tyson approach. He staggered back a few steps as he took in Tyson's strong frame. The ice cream cones in Tyson's large hands somehow made him seem even more intimidating. Knowing he was a math teacher and almost 60 made the scene oddly funny. She didn't laugh but smiled widely as she took the chocolate ice cream cone from him. As Blake processed what was happening, Miranda noticed his expression change. He glanced from Tyson to the expensive bike Christy had bought for him. "Who are you?" Blake asked again. "Tyson Kane." "Christy's new partner," Miranda chimed in happily. Tyson looked at her, signaling her to stop talking. He frowned at his melting ice cream and moved his tongue around it while she watched with interest. Blake looked at Tyson with clear dislike. "She left me for you?" "No, her reasons for ending it had nothing to do with me," Tyson replied firmly. Miranda snorted. "Christy looks much happier now than she ever did with Blake." Tyson turned to her, looking a bit annoyed. "You're not being helpful." Miranda's eyes went wide with fear as Blake jumped at Tyson, who was focused on her. Tyson's hand swung out, accidentally pushing Blake with his ice cream cone, getting it all over Blake's face. Blake stepped back, struggling to see. Tyson, wary, watched him as Blake swung his fists wildly, hitting a pole instead. The sound of something breaking made Miranda and Tyson wince. Blake stopped and cried out in pain. "That looks painful. I'll call for help," Tyson said, pulling out his phone. After he ended the call, he asked Miranda to grab some napkins from the shop. When she came back outside, a police car pulled up. She gave some napkins to Blake, who was sitting down with a hurting hand, and the rest to Tyson to clean himself up. Miranda switched off her helmet camera and moved the video onto her phone. 2 police officers walked over. "Did someone call for help?" Tyson started to explain when Blake interrupted, saying, "I was attacked." Miranda jumped up, and Tyson gently put a finger to her lips before speaking to the police. He showed them his ID. "I called for help. Mr. Carlington got upset about something Miss Moreno said regarding his past relationship. He decided to react physically." "Liar! This guy hit me with his ice cream. I had to defend myself," Blake shouted, then quickly realized how silly that sounded. One officer looked at Tyson's ID and expressed surprise. "I wouldn't have recognized you. You look really different from 6 years ago." Tyson froze, taken aback. "Officer Patricks, I found you back then when you were in bad shape. Looks like you recovered pretty well," the officer said, handing back the ID. Miranda noticed Tyson was a bit stunned, but managed to nod with a tight smile. "Yes. It took some time, but yes. Thank you, Officer Patricks," Tyson replied, shaking his hand. The other officer smiled too. Miranda saw Blake's expression change as he realized he wasn't going to win this time. She felt a little pleased. "Would you like to see what really happened?" she asked the officers. Everyone turned to her. She pointed to her helmet camera. "I recorded it." Blake looked a bit pale. Miranda smiled at the officers. "The video starts when Blake arrived at the curb." She glanced at Blake, who was squinting at her. Yes, I recorded all your hurtful comments, and I'm going to the police tomorrow to report the threats you made against me. She loved seeing the worried look on his face. What a nice day. Tyson noticed how pleased Miranda looked. She really didn't like Blake. Are you going to make a report, Mr. Kane? Officer Patrick asked, bringing him back to the moment. He didn't have the energy to go through with it. No. I thought the ice cream in his face would be enough to cool him down. His hitting the light post is justice enough for me. I hope he learned something from this, Tyson replied with a sigh. He saw Miranda give Officer Patrick's partner the memory card from the camera, and in return, she inserted a spare card into the camera. After saying goodbye, Tyson watched as the police led Blake to the ambulance that had just arrived. He went into the ice cream shop to wash his hands. When he returned, he looked at Miranda. Are you ready to keep going? She nodded, looking happy. The ride through downtown opened Tyson's eyes. Everything seemed new. The streetlights were bright and the roads were freshly paved. Many buildings looked nice again. The area had changed for the better. Since this was the area that would have been harmed if the two students had succeeded in their plans, he wondered why the town council had decided to improve and refresh the old business district. Perhaps the media attention made them act. The funds likely could have gone into their pockets instead, so this outcome felt even better. He was glad to see life returning here, with young people and university students enjoying the unique shops and trendy coffee houses. As they got closer to the university, Tyson realized that the distance from his home to these buildings wasn't long or hard to travel. A thought crossed his mind about visiting George. He slowed down, and Miranda raised her eyebrow in curiosity. Do you think it's okay if I just stop by to say hello to George? He asked. She smiled brightly. That sounds like a great idea. Which building? 6 years ago, the math department was in the Clement Hall building, he answered, unsure. It's still there. She rode across the campus and stopped at the bench outside the building. Miranda gestured for him to lay his bike down on the grass beside hers. I'll keep an eye on the bikes. Take all the time you need, she said, pulling her phone from her pocket. He placed his helmet on the bike and walked up the steps to the double doors of the building. At the top, he paused and looked at himself. Dressed in cycling gear wasn't the best way to enter his old workplace. He took a deep breath and sighed. He was retired and didn't have to impress anyone anymore. He opened the door and stepped inside. The administrative offices were just off to the right. George's office was behind those, but Tyson wasn't part of the staff anymore, so he decided to ask the office staff if George was available. He walked up to the counter and noticed 2 young women looking at him. We don't take courier deliveries here, one of them said. Tyson chuckled lightly. I'm not a courier. I'm looking for George Haley. I'm an old friend. Is he in? Just then, he heard another door open behind him, but focused on the young woman at the counter, who was eyeing him with curiosity. I need a name, she said firmly. Tyson Kane. Over to his right, he heard a squeak, and some books fell with a thud. He turned to see an older woman staring at him in surprise. She was quite short, wearing sensible shoes and a simple tan blouse under a brown sweater with a brown skirt. Still slim and gray-haired, she had striking green eyes. Suddenly, he remembered her name, Gail Sampson. She had been George's personal secretary for years. Tyson, she said, her voice shaky. He smiled. Hello, Gail. Oh my gosh! Tyson! She exclaimed as she rushed over to hug him. Startled, he looked down at her before wrapping his arms around her, too. He noticed the 2 young women at the desk watching them, looking surprised. Gail pulled back to smile up at him. You found a way to come back to the university? He glanced at the 2 women listening in, then smiled down at Gail. Yes, well, it wasn't just me. A student named Miranda Moreno suggested I try biking instead of driving. It worked. Here I am. He looked around. I'm still amazed that I'm here. You have to see George, Gail said eagerly. He nodded. Is he in his office? I would like to say hello. No, he's in a class. Come with me, she insisted. Tyson hesitated. I don't want to disturb him or his class. Gail's green eyes met his as she pushed the office door open. George would never forgive me if I didn't take you to see him right away. She led him up the stairs at the end of the hall to the 3rd floor. The door for the 3rd classroom on the right was closed, and Tyson tried to stop Gail, but she just made a small sound of determination. She knocked lightly on the door twice and then opened it. George Haley stood at the front of the class, his face showing signs of frustration. His wild white hair looked as if he'd been pulling at it. He turned his head toward the door and froze when he recognized who was there, dropping his math book to the floor with a loud thud. Gale gently urged Tyson forward, and he stepped into the room, feeling the gaze of the 18 students shift toward him. "You're here!" George exclaimed, a mix of surprise and joy in his voice. "How?" George gasped. "A student named Miranda Moreno suggested that if I couldn't travel by car, maybe I could try using a bicycle." He gestured around the classroom. "It seems I can," he said humbly. "Can't travel in a car? That's lame," a student said. "Mr. Phillips, you're close to failing my class. You need to apologize for your lack of empathy or leave my classroom," George said, his gaze piercing into the surprised young man. "George, it's okay. Being young and a bit foolish isn't a crime, and it's not the end of the world. There's always hope," Tyson said as he moved closer to his friend. "Apologize," George said in a low voice. "I'm sorry," Mr. Phillips replied quickly. Tyson noticed that his friend seemed to be calming down. "I'm sorry. I didn't come here to disrupt your class. I made it into town today, and I thought I would visit since you came to see me so often," Tyson explained. "That's wonderful, and I thank you for sharing this moment with me." He stepped forward and took Tyson's hands. "Mr. Haley, can you introduce us to your friend?" said a young woman with a pixie haircut seated in the front row. Tyson felt her curious gaze on him. George let go of Tyson's hands and smiled at the woman under his thick mustache. "Of course, Miss DeWitt." He placed a hand on Tyson's back and turned him toward the students. "This is my good friend, Tyson Kane." Some students looked surprised. They seemed to remember events from 6 years ago. Miss DeWitt appeared to be among them. "The same Tyson Kane who—" "Yes, but more importantly, he's Tyson Kane, the math genius." Tyson smiled at his friend's enthusiasm but shook his head modestly. Noticing the uncertainty on the faces of the students, George glanced at the clock. "Okay, class, there are 20 minutes left. How many of you are still confused about this chapter?" All hands went up and the professor frowned, looking at Tyson for help. "I've messed up. Can you assist them?" Tyson leaned back slightly, surveying the curious faces. He didn't realize he was moving to the front of the class until George handed him the textbook he had dropped earlier. He looked at the page and saw what they were studying. To understand their struggles, he began asking the students one by one where they were having trouble. After gathering enough information, he asked everyone to stand, stretch their arms out in front of them, and shake their hands while making silly sounds to clear their minds. He showed them the gesture, and after the initial laughter, he got 16 out of 18 students to join in. Mr. Phillips and the boy beside him didn't participate, so he turned to them. "Mr. Phillips and—" he asked, looking at the embarrassed man. "Mr. Kent," the young man quietly replied. Tyson nodded. "Mr. Phillips and Mr. Kent, you need to clear your mind. It doesn't matter how you do it, just make it different from what you've done before. How about this?" He suddenly struck a playful pose, making a funny face. The class burst into laughter. Mr. Kent joined in and copied him perfectly, so Tyson clapped. Mr. Phillips made a half-hearted attempt, and Tyson just gave him a nod. "Awesome. Now that we're all feeling fresh, let me share a little story," Tyson said cheerfully. 12 minutes later, the students were leaving the room, chatting happily, and Tyson leaned back on the desk, feeling a warmth inside that he thought he had lost. Miss DeWitt stopped in front of him. "Thank you for coming today. We all feel better now that we understand. If you'd like to visit more often, we would love that. I would love to see you." She gave him a friendly smile as she joined the others outside. George had a big smile on his face, and Gale leaned against the wall by the door, grinning too. Tyson shook off the friendly vibe. "Thank you for letting me help out a bit. That was enjoyable?" George shook his head. "Enjoyable? Did you see how upset I was when you showed up? This material isn't fun unless you really care about it. You made it sound like a great story. For me, it's hard work. No one seems to listen to me, but you had every student hanging on your words. Not Mr. Phillips." George sighed. Right, not him. He came in with a chip on his shoulder. Tyson nodded. "You can't help them if they don't want it." He looked at George and Gale. "I missed you two." Gale stepped closer. We missed you too. The students missed you as well. They've been listening to George for too long. They need you back. Tyson looked surprised. Just helped George this one time. I'm retired. You did me a great favor and I really appreciate it, George said, giving him a friendly pat on the arm. But you can't deny that you felt the connection, the joy of reaching their minds, and the reward of helping them learn. You are a teacher. Math is your passion. Teaching comes naturally to you. The students left your lesson more excited than they ever have from mine. I love physics, but I'm stuck teaching math classes. They could be yours again, and everyone would benefit. George paused when he saw Tyson was about to argue, so he raised his hands to stop him. We are really excited about the new freedom and mobility you have. Take some time to think about it, and remember, you're always welcome to visit. I think Miss DeWitt mentioned that other things would be great too. George Haley, Gail scolded. I'm just saying, George replied with a grin and a shrug. Tyson hugged George and then gave Gail a hug, which she accepted with a big smile. I should head out now. I left Miranda waiting outside with the bikes. Oh, we should go with you so we can thank her personally, George said excitedly, and Gail agreed with a nod. Tyson led his friends downstairs and out the front doors to where Miranda stood waiting. Gail moved forward and gave the surprised girl a hug, followed closely by George. Thank you so much for helping Tyson get out of his isolation, George said warmly. Oh, it wasn't anything special, and I had my reasons too. I was hoping he'd enjoy cycling enough to join me, she admitted. Gail patted her hand. It was your idea to find a different way for him to get to town. None of us thought of that, and George has been visiting him for years. She gave George a teasing look, and he just shrugged. George watched as Tyson put on his helmet and looked at the bicycle. His eyebrows raised. That's a beautiful bike. How much does something like this cost? Tyson blinked and looked at Miranda, who seemed a bit uncomfortable. How much did Christy spend on the bicycle? He asked. She looked up at him. 6,000, she said quietly. What? Tyson gasped. Miranda bit her lip and glanced at him nervously. Tyson frowned. I need to talk to her about this. George placed a hand on Tyson's arm. The price is small compared to the value of your freedom. Tyson looked at his friend for a moment and then nodded slowly. We should go. It was great to see you both again. I'll come back for more visits. Remember what we said too, Gail mentioned, and he nodded to her. They got back on their bicycles and waved goodbye to George and Gail as they rode away from the campus. The new signs led them to the western edge of town, where a winding country lane began. The entrance was blocked for cars, but they rode between the metal posts. They picked up speed, and Tyson began to smile again as the bike glided over the rolling hills and curved corners smoothly. He had to admit it was a well-made bike. Still, he thought 6,000 was too much for Christy to spend on it. He decided he would insist on paying for some or most of it. Sometimes generosity could go too far. On a straight path, he glanced over at Miranda, who was watching him. Are you upset with us? She asked. No, you both had good intentions. I'm sure I could have enjoyed riding a bicycle that cost less than $1,000 just as much as I enjoy this amazing bike. He sighed, truly appreciating the ride. So, does this mean you'll keep going on rides with me? Miranda asked. He smiled as he noticed the road rising ahead. Yes, I would love to go on more rides with you. This is fantastic. Miranda squealed with joy and sped ahead, giggling. He pushed himself off the seat to catch up. He felt like a kid again, and that was a great feeling. Devin Wilson walked through the hospital's emergency room feeling down. Not long ago, he brightened up any room he entered, and the nurses looked forward to seeing him. Now they seemed to avoid him. He couldn't blame them. He knew he was short-tempered these days. 2 police officers waited with a young man who looked confident. Devin didn't entirely relate, but he understood what it was like to grow up in a wealthy family. His parents had money, and he never struggled. He attended the best private schools and went to a top medical college. He was a member of prestigious sports clubs and interacted with rich and influential people. His marriage to Cecily had been more about politics than love, and it ended poorly. After their divorce, he promised himself he would stay away from marriage. Still, for one special woman, he would have happily reconsidered. But that was not meant to be. With a sigh, He picked up the patient's chart and approached them. A quick glance at the clipboard and the way the young man held his right hand told him everything he needed to know. He had likely been sent for X-rays when he first arrived. He would check the results on the terminal after speaking to the patient. The three men turned to him as he arrived. "Hello, Mr. Carlington. I see you've hurt your right hand. How did that happen?" "I punched something hard," was the short answer. "Something or someone? The police are here, which usually means another person is involved," Devin replied. "I was trying to hit someone to defend myself, and I hit a light post instead," Blake murmured. Devin looked at the officers. "Was the other person hurt at all?" "No, Mr. Kane managed to dodge the punch. Mr. Carlington was lucky the other guy didn't retaliate. He's built like a tank," the officer said. Devin felt his head start to spin. "Did you say Tyson Kane?" The officer nodded. "I had heard he was seriously hurt and confined to his home because of personal issues," Devin said in shock. The officer laughed. "I don't know about that, but he certainly didn't look injured to me. He was riding bikes with a pretty girl and seemed really happy. Hey!" Devin quickly walked away from them and dropped the patient file at the nurse's station as a sharp pain hit his head. Kane was cycling with someone inappropriate? No way. He left the building, got into his Porsche Carrera, and sped out of the parking lot. He drove through town and onto the new road heading south toward the lake. He was able to push the car on the open, smooth road, and the view rushed past. When he turned onto the lakefront road, he had to swerve to avoid a young woman on a bicycle. It might have been the girl with Kane. He gestured angrily out the window and sped off. He knew exactly where Tyson lived. He had been there once before. Devin pulled into the gravel driveway and got out of his car. He walked up to the door, his mind racing. He wasn't sure what he would say or do, but he needed to see for himself if what the police said was true. He knocked hard on the door and it swung open. He stood there, staring at the man who looked back at him. Tyson didn't seem hurt or weak. He looked like he was in better shape than Devin. "Wilson, what's going on?" Tyson was caught off guard as Devin hit him with all his strength, sending him back into the living room. He struck him again and again, using every move he knew that could inflict pain. He wanted Kane to suffer. When Devin regained his focus, he stood over Tyson, breathing heavily, and his hands ached. Kane's body was solid, with no extra weight. Devin had hurt his own fingers from hitting Tyson's tough body, something he had never done to anyone else before this moment. He looked down at the shocked man on the floor, wondering how he had survived the accident that took Imani from him. "Why are you still alive?" Devin demanded. Tyson blinked up at him. "You hurt me. You didn't kill me." "No, why didn't the train take you too?" Devin shouted, his frustration evident. Tyson winced as pain shot through him. "I don't know. Sometimes. I wish it had." Devin hit Tyson again and pulled his hand back as it stung. Tyson looked up again. "Not very smart for a doctor to hurt his hands like this." Devin scowled down at him. "You're right, but I forgot. You're the expert, aren't you?" He then kicked Tyson's side with force. Tyson groaned, and suddenly something heavy landed on Devin's back and knocked into his face. He turned quickly, and the female cyclist fell onto the sofa with a thud. Devin hesitantly touched his face and winced. When he pulled his hand back, he found blood on his fingers. "You shouldn't have done that!" Tyson took a step forward, his gaze locked on Devin, whose anger was boiling over. In that moment, Tyson's voice cut through the tension. "Miranda, go!" he shouted, and she quickly jumped up, racing out the open front door. Devin turned back to Tyson, rage etched on his face. Tyson, though hurt and bleeding, met Devin's furious stare with calm determination. "She told me," Tyson said quietly, his words striking Devin like a blow. Devin froze, taken aback. "She told you? Told you what? Did she tell you we were together?" Devin's voice shook as he spoke, his emotions close to the surface. Tyson held his gaze, unflinching and silent, his eyes full of quiet disappointment. "I loved her!" Devin suddenly shouted, his voice breaking with anger. "I would have been a better husband than you! You didn't treat her the way she deserved!" Tyson's voice was pained. "You loved her!" Devin sneered. "If you loved her so much, you should have shown it. Maybe then she wouldn't have turned to me." The hurt in Tyson's expression was undeniable, and it dawned on Devin that Tyson truly hadn't known. Devin let out a bitter laugh. finding some satisfaction in Tyson's pain. "Fine. You didn't know? Well, now you do," Devon said, a cruel edge to his voice. "The first time was at a convention. We went out for drinks, and I knew then I was taken with her. We spent time together, and I thought she'd see I cared about her." Tyson's face showed anguish, and Devon seemed to feed off it, his words spilling out with a dark sense of purpose. "Every time we met, I felt something stronger for her. I wanted her to be with me completely. I came here ready to ask her to leave you. I wanted her to choose me and let me take care of her. But do you know what she said? She said she loved you. Can you believe that? After everything, she still loved you." Devon's face twisted with frustration. "I thought if we could be together, she'd finally see that we belonged together, but instead she pushed me away, told me to leave." His voice softened, filled with a bitter sadness. "I just wanted her to see I loved her." The room fell silent as the weight of his words settled. Tyson's heart ached, torn by grief and betrayal. "That night you went to the party." Devon moved toward Tyson to strike again, but Tyson reacted first, his fist connecting solidly with Devon's face. Devon staggered, stunned as the pain shot through him. He barely registered Tyson, who, fueled by anger, managed to land another punch before exhaustion overtook him. Devon felt his strength give way, collapsing to the floor. Tyson, drained, rocked on his knees. As the scene blurred around him, flashing red and blue lights appeared outside the door. With his last bit of energy spent, Tyson slumped down and drifted into unconsciousness. Tyson woke in a hospital bed, the room dimly lit. For a moment he wondered if he was back from an earlier accident, memories tangled in his mind. But while he felt pain, it wasn't as severe as before. The real ache was in his heart, a deep wound left by Devon's bitter revelations. Each breath felt like it cut deeper. "I'm so sorry," a soft voice whispered. Tyson's eyes opened, feeling the weight of past grief and pain. He closed his eyes again, trying to shut it all out. "Please, just leave," he murmured. "I can't." "Why?" His voice trembled with frustration and sorrow. He needed answers he knew he'd never get. At that moment, a nurse entered the room, her face kind but concerned. "Mr. Kane, are you awake?" Tyson realized his face was wet with tears. He reached clumsily for a tissue, but the nurse handed him one with a gentle smile. After he wiped his face, he managed a weak smile back. "Thank you. Sorry about the yelling." She nodded understandingly. "It's all right. You've had a tough day." Tyson gave a small, weary chuckle. "It wasn't all bad. I got back on my bike. I saw friends at the university, but yeah, the ending wasn't great." He shifted on the bed, grimacing. "I didn't break anything, did I?" The nurse shook her head. "No, just some bruises. They're keeping you here for observation since you were unconscious when you arrived." She hesitated before adding, "Dr. Wilson, though, has a few broken bones in his hands, a fractured eye socket, and his nose will need some serious work. He'll be feeling this for a while." Tyson's expression darkened. "Wilson hurt my wife," he said, his voice low and strained. The nurse's eyes widened in shock, absorbing the weight of his words. "How do you know?" His face was serious. He was bragging. He didn't realize that didn't make her care for him. Tyson felt a soft tissue on his cheek. Was he crying again? He reached up to dry his eyes, but the tears kept coming, and he couldn't stop them. The nurse stayed with him until he fell asleep again. The next morning, Tyson was in a wheelchair at the hospital's exit, arguing with the staff, who said he needed a ride home. He insisted he couldn't do that. He was getting more upset until Miranda came up beside him. He looked at her and felt relieved. "It's okay, we have him now," she told the office worker, pointing outside. Raoul was visible in his pickup truck. The clerk nodded and walked away. Tyson looked at Miranda with worry. "I can't." She patted his shoulder. "I understand. How much pain are you in?" He blinked at her. "I'm sore, but I can walk." "If you can walk, you can ride your bike," she said and led him outside. Raoul was taking Tyson's bike out of the back of the truck. Tyson smiled at Miranda thankfully, and she returned a bright smile. Then he was confused. "How did you get my bike from my house?" "After the ambulances took you and Wilson away, I used your keys from the counter to lock up your house." Raoul picked me up and brought me to the hospital, but they wouldn't let me see you. This morning, I called to find out when you'd be leaving. We got your bike, helmet, and gloves from your place and locked up again." Miranda took his hand. "When he drove past me on the road, he almost hit me and looked really angry. I felt uneasy, so I rode back and saw him standing over you. I didn't think before I tried to help you. He pushed me off and was going to hurt me too when you stopped him. When you told me to run, I only went as far as the driveway to call the police. He didn't follow, so I came back to your door and listened for the police. I gave them a statement after you were taken away and told them everything I heard." Tyson looked into her eyes. "The police know he hurt her?" Miranda nodded, and after a moment Tyson made a stiff nod. He put on his gloves and helmet as Raoul got Miranda's bike from the truck too. Raoul waved to them and drove away. Tyson carefully got on his bike and took some deep breaths to calm his shaking muscles. Other than some bruises, he felt fine. He followed Miranda out of the driveway and across town to the path leading to the lake. He loved this familiar road and was thankful they could ride slowly without worrying about cars. Miranda was content to ride in silence with him. Before long, they reached the lakefront road and stopped at his driveway. "Thank you so much for bringing my bike to the hospital," he said. "I wasn't happy about the long walk home." He held out his hand for his keys. "My bag is inside," she said. "Your bag?" he asked. "I talked to Christy and told her everything that happened. We both think you shouldn't be alone tonight. Since she is out of town, I'm going to stay with you." Tyson frowned. "I've been on my own for 6 years. I don't need. You know things are different now. I wish I could have been there with you last night. You shouldn't have had to hear that news alone," Miranda said softly. Tyson took a deep breath, feeling tight in his chest. She noticed and placed her hand on his arm as she walked her bike to the front door. Taking out the keys, she let herself inside. She leaned her bike against the wall as Tyson did the same. "You don't have a garage? Is this where you'll keep your bike?" she asked. Still a bit irritated by Christy and Miranda, Tyson just nodded. "For now." He walked to his bedroom and grabbed a pair of shorts and a t-shirt. He then went into the bathroom and closed the door. He wanted to wash off the hospital smell. The water felt sharp against his bruises and he winced. But he pushed through and cleaned his hair and body. When he turned off the water and stepped out, his muscles were shaking. He leaned against the counter, trying to catch his breath. After everything from the night before and his rough ride home, his body was exhausted. He tried to put on his shorts but dropped them instead. "Oh no!" The bathroom door opened and Miranda looked in with concern. "Haven't you ever heard of knocking?" he said, his voice shaky. "You were groaning through your shower and I can see you might fall over. Come on, you've had enough for today. Plus, I've seen you without clothes," she said firmly. She moved closer, wrapped her arm around his back, and helped him put his arm over her shoulder. Miranda guided him out of the bathroom and to his bed. "You look so tired. You need to rest." Tyson wanted to argue, but realized she was right. "Do you want something for the pain?" she asked, as she pulled down the sheets. "No, I'm tired of feeling out of it," he mumbled as fatigue took over. He got under the covers slowly, feeling every bruise, then sighed as he laid his head on the pillow. His eyes were already closing when he felt a gentle kiss on his forehead. He slowly opened his eyes enough to see the blushing face of the brunette beside him, before drifting back to sleep. She woke him up later to share some dinner, soup and bread. Then he fell asleep again. When he woke up again, the house was dark, and he felt warmth in the bed next to him. He saw dark hair spread across the pillow and Miranda's peaceful face as she slept. He carefully got out of bed, trying not to groan at his sore muscles. He quietly left the bedroom and closed the door behind him. He walked over to the patio doors and looked out at the dark lake in his backyard. The moon provided just enough light to see where his property ended and the water began. "The lake doesn't want you." He sighed, knowing this thought would bring back memories of her. He had questions but knew he would only hear answers he already knew. Still, he felt the need to express them. Glancing to his right, he saw Imani standing beside him in her nightwear. She looked beautiful, yet sad. He turned his gaze back to the lake, not wanting to see her sorrow because he was the one hurting. "It seems you didn't need me either," he said softly. I always needed you, Imani replied gently. But I wasn't enough. I was greedy. Tyson raised his eyebrows in surprise at her response. Thinking back to Imani's behavior at the hospital parties, he realized she enjoyed the attention from the men she worked with, which made him think she could be seen as greedy. And I wasn't attractive enough for you. You wanted that too. You wanted to be with him, he said with difficulty. I love you, she whispered. Yet you were with him. Something you never wanted to do with me, he said sharply. An idea struck him. Is that why you didn't do it with me? Yes, she admitted quietly, her shame clear in her voice. He shook his head in disbelief. He couldn't be sure if she felt ashamed or just regretted getting caught since she had never confessed to anything herself. He recalled her words from that night in the car, filled with anger as she accused him of being unfaithful. Hypocrite, he snapped. I'm sorry. I was afraid. Once again he was caught off guard. Afraid? Where did that come from? That's nonsense. He refused to let his mind create false stories. You were so focused on your work that I felt left out. I couldn't be a part of that part of your life. He knew she had felt a bit intimidated by his job, but he had told her he didn't expect her to pretend to be interested in math just for him. They each had their own strengths. Tyson remembered their marriage and thought about his own behavior. Had he been neglectful? He recalled the stolen kisses and hugs in the morning as she hurried to get ready, the laughter, and how she would push him away sometimes. He hadn't done that every morning, and maybe it happened less in the last year of their marriage. But she had never mentioned feeling neglected or unhappy. He shook his head. This didn't explain her choices. He felt like he was just grasping at straws. That's not an excuse for what you did, he stated firmly. I know, she sighed, sounding very sorry. He rubbed his eyes, trying to clear his mind. It wasn't right to think about her feelings in a way that wasn't real. He wouldn't deceive himself. I want you to leave, he said, looking over at Imani, but Miranda was there instead. Oh, he exclaimed. Can I wait until morning? She asked quietly. Morning? Oh, I wasn't talking to you. You can stay, he quickly added. Miranda frowned, confused. Who were you talking to? He sighed, not wanting to pull anyone else into his confusing thoughts. My wife, or rather, the image of her that sometimes appears in my mind for strange talks like this. Miranda's eyes widened as she surveyed the room. You see her now? No, she's gone. I mean, the moment has passed. I don't believe in ghosts, he insisted. Miranda shivered and made a gesture for protection. My mom saw her mom for a few months after she passed. She gave my mom good advice. She sometimes comes back, just for my mom. She locked eyes with him. We believe. He felt tired again, wanting to avoid arguing with her. I'm going back to bed. Miranda took his hand and followed him to the bedroom. They both slipped under the covers and settled in. She turned away from him but reached back, pulling him closer. It took him by surprise. He tried to move away, but she held on tightly. He felt her lips brush against his palm as she held his hand to her face. She gave soft kisses on his fingertips. This made him feel a rush of emotions. He felt a mix of confusion and need. He wanted to stop what was happening, knowing she was much younger than him. Plus, his body was still sore from earlier, making him hesitant. When she adjusted so that he was pressed against her, he wanted to protest. But before he could say anything, she moved closer, and everything changed. Tyson! She exclaimed. She sighed. This feels so good. He couldn't help but agree. It was almost too much to take in. She was close to him, and the way their bodies connected felt incredible, making him want even more. In a quick motion, he turned her onto her stomach. From this position above her, he could feel a different kind of connection that was equally exciting. Yes! Harder! She exclaimed, and he pushed himself to give her what she wanted. Even though his muscles were tired, his need for her was too strong. The room was filled with the sounds of their movements. I'm coming, she said with a thrill in her voice. He quickened his movements, knowing he had to keep going despite his fatigue. As their pace increased, her sounds became more intense. Give it to me! Yes, just like that! She encouraged, as her body responded to the moment. Tyson found it overwhelming. Finally, he pulled back and rested beside her. She quickly snuggled under the covers, surprising him by leaning down to take care of things. After a moment, she slipped out of bed to use the bathroom. When Miranda returned, she cuddled up to him under the sheets, sinking into a peaceful sleep. Tyson couldn't quite drift off. He lay there, feeling her warmth beside him, contemplating where his life was headed. I really like her, he thought. Suddenly he noticed Imani sitting at the bottom of the bed, looking at him with a mix of beauty and sadness. He glanced down at Miranda, who was peacefully asleep, then turned back to Imani. You can go now, he whispered. No, not yet, she replied softly. He frowned. Why not? I can't tell you, she pouted. His eyebrows raised. What a strange situation this was. Soon? He asked hopefully. She smiled and gave a small nod. Then in the blink of an eye, she was gone. Feeling strangely reassured by her words, Tyson began to relax and he started looking forward to the day ahead. There was so much potential. With his heart racing and lungs taking in deep breaths, Tyson grinned at the beautiful girl whose face lit up in the morning sun. Wow, you're really outdoing yourself, Miranda joked as they rode their bikes toward the university. He laughed, enjoying the thrill of cycling again. What had once been a childhood hobby had become an important part of his exercise routine and his main way of getting around between his cottage by the lake and the university. After 6 years of feeling stuck, Tyson's life was finally starting to improve. In the past 10 months, he had begun to reconnect with his old life. The university welcomed him back, and he received a new office down the hall from George's. Though it used to be an old storage room, they had fixed it up nicely. George was thrilled to have him back, and didn't mind that Tyson's office was bigger and had its own bathroom with a shower. George was just happy to return to teaching his favorite subject, physics. Instead of getting a parking spot, Tyson had a bike locker put in since he wouldn't be driving anytime soon. His PTSD made it hard for him to be in a car without needing strong medication. He enjoyed cycling and rode in all kinds of weather. He bought a mountain bike with a rack and bag so he could bike to town for groceries. This not only made him healthier, but also helped him feel more independent. Plus, it saved him from paying delivery fees. His racing bike was his main way of commuting, and every day, Miranda met him outside his cottage to race him to campus. It took months for him to get better at biking until he started winning most of the time. While they both loved cycling, Miranda was no longer in a romantic relationship with him. She had a new boyfriend who treated her well, and Tyson was genuinely happy for her. Christy was doing great in New York. He got regular emails from her, and her career was thriving. She might soon travel to different places as her company planned to expand into Europe, starting with Paris. Christy was really excited about that. During her last visit, she mentioned that she had started dating someone new. This conversation happened after they had spent an evening together that left them feeling confused. Tyson asked if she was comparing her new boyfriend to him, and she admitted she was. They talked about it for a long time and decided to end the physical part of their relationship. Coming back to the present, Tyson waved to Miranda as he turned down the lane toward his building while she continued on. He put his bike in the locker, changed his cycling shoes for sneakers, and locked up. He walked into the building and greeted the two young women at the front office. "Good morning, Leona and Felicity." "Good morning, Mr. Kane," they replied in unison. He paused for a moment, raising an eyebrow as they giggled. "Good morning, Tyson," they greeted following his earlier request. He smiled slightly and walked down the hall to his office. He peeked into George's office. "Good morning, Gail. Is George still in bed?" he asked playfully. "And how would I know that?" she replied with a serious look. Tyson grinned, knowing that while Gail had worked with George for many years, they always kept things professional. Gail was a private person, and he didn't think she had a romantic partner. She seemed content without one. Tyson didn't quite understand asexuality, but he respected her choices. It was still fun to joke around with his friends. "You manage so much for him. I figured you went to his place each morning to make sure he got up. The man really relies on you." "I'll admit that might be true, but I keep my help to the university," she replied with a tired sigh. "Helpless?" a voice grumbled from behind Tyson. He turned to see George standing there in a wrinkled suit and looking tired. Tyson raised his eyebrows. "What happened to you?" "Step aside and let me through, and I might tell you," George said, trying not to show annoyance at Tyson's fit physique. He wished he didn't feel so uncomfortable about his own appearance. Tyson moved aside and George walked in, putting his briefcase on a chair. Yawning, George said, "I was in a video meeting with Yuri from Russia and Gustav from Sweden. They had some interesting questions to discuss. We were up all night." "Not very responsible of you," Gail said, shaking her head. He rubbed his face tiredly. "I know, but it was exciting." A bit of life returned to his eyes. "Get some rest. I'll cancel your first class," Gail said wearily. "See? Helpless." Tyson laughed as he walked to his office, hearing Gail chuckle and George sigh. Tyson unlocked his office door and closed it behind him. He walked over to the wardrobe he had set up in his office. It held a week's worth of clothes. He often rode his bike to the university on weekends to fill it with fresh clothes and take home the dirty ones. Inside, he had 5 dress shirts and 3 pairs of dress pants. The bottom drawer had his everyday clothes and shoes. He didn't care much about fashion, so his clothes were pretty simple. His shirts were solid colors like white, gray, black, dark blue, and burgundy. All his pants were black and made of stretchy fabric since his legs had grown to a size that didn't fit well in regular pants. Tyson took a pair of socks from the drawer and headed to the washroom. He quickly changed and stepped into the shower. He rinsed his cycling clothes, wrung them out, and hung them up on a small line he'd put in the shower to let them drip dry. There was no need to rush since his first class wasn't until 10. Still, he quickly washed himself, rinsed off, and got out of the shower. He dried off rapidly, and after putting on his underwear, he let out a sigh of relief. Lately, he had unexpected visitors during his morning showers. Twice that week and twice the week before, Leona and Felicity had taken turns surprising him. Both said they were single and showed interest in spending time with the new professor. He should have politely declined them the first time, but since they weren't in his classes and promised to keep things quiet, he let it slide. Leona liked to be adventurous and had specific requests when it came to fun. She was always enthusiastic and had a vibrant personality, embracing her femininity while wanting to enjoy some excitement. Felicity had a darker style, often wearing black clothes and looking quite different. She also showed a strong interest in being submissive and wanted him to take charge in their time together. She often wore her hair in a ponytail for that reason, wanting him to pull it during their encounters. Today, it seemed like he would have the morning to himself. He smiled to himself, unsure if he felt disappointed or relieved. After putting on some deodorant, he stepped out of the bathroom. He stopped in his tracks when he saw a stout, dark-haired woman sitting on the couch beside his closed door. She was wearing old-fashioned, black-rimmed glasses sitting on her nose, a tweed jacket over a black t-shirt, jeans with tears, and black boots. She was also holding her phone, looking at something. When she noticed him, she turned the phone towards him and touched the screen. Did you just take a picture of me?" he asked quietly, feeling uneasy. She looked just as surprised as he was, and her eyes finally met his. "Tyson? Kane?" He nodded, trying to remember if she was a faculty member or a student. Then he frowned, realizing she hadn't answered his question. "I'm Sydney Calabra from the New Yorker magazine. I had an appointment to interview Professor Kane," she said, a bit uncertain. "Yes, that's me, but I don't know anything about an interview. No one told me about it," he replied, feeling annoyed. The woman nodded and then smiled. "I must say, you look nothing like the pictures we found from the original story." He sighed. "The original story was about the train accident?" he asked tiredly. She nodded, her smile widening. Tyson wondered what that smile meant. "Who set up the story?" he asked. "It was the dean's office that called my editor. Dean McNally is a friend of my boss," she replied. Tyson frowned. This made sense now. He remembered McNally talking about getting back the costs of bringing him back and fixing the office. Tyson had thought that meant he'd be speaking at a conference, not having a direct meeting with a reporter. He turned to the cupboard and picked up a pair of pants, putting them on while keeping his back to her. "I have a class at 10. We should finish the interview part before then. You don't mind if I record it?" she said, smiling confidently. She tapped on her phone a few more times. Tyson shook his head as he reached for his white shirt, then stopped. He turned to her. "Interview part? Dean McNally suggested I watch you in the classroom because he thinks your teaching style is different but very effective. I'm excited to see you teach," she explained. Tyson snorted. "Exciting? I'm a math teacher, not a sports coach. Sydney laughed. But you don't look like any math teacher I've known. You look like someone who takes fitness seriously. He sighed and grabbed his black shirt. His students seemed to like this color on him. He thought about how hard he had worked to get into shape since the accident. He noticed her taking another picture and frowned. I've been focusing on exercise since the accident. It took time to recover. Then I just kept at it. Can you share what exercises you did to get fit? She asked. Tyson sat down and slipped on his socks. Since he couldn't avoid this, he just nodded. And so, the interview began. That's right, Miss DeWitt. Does anyone have questions about how she found the answer? Tyson looked from the petite brunette to the faces of the 23 students in the tiered classroom. Even Mr. Phillips, who was taking the class again after failing last year, seemed relaxed and wore his usual smug look. Tyson nodded at Miss DeWitt, signaling her to return to her seat. She walked back a bit playfully, aware he was watching her. Her cheeks were slightly flushed when she sat down. She was retaking the course to boost her grade. She had passed before, but she enrolled again when she learned he was back. Tyson knew she had another reason for being in his class again. On her first day, she'd asked him to grab a coffee and a snack. It was clear what she really wanted. He told her he would enjoy a coffee, but he couldn't have snacks with students in his class. She looked at him and asked if he could help a student who had passed his course. He replied that the student would need to improve by 10 points from their last effort. So, yes. She accepted the challenge, and as things progressed, she was likely to exceed the grade by 20 points. With only 2 weeks left, her playful behavior was quite bold. He felt lucky to teach a course that could be graded entirely on students' understanding through tests. He didn't worry about participation or personal opinions. This semester's group of students was bright and eager to learn. He addressed the class. All right, we have a review next week, followed by the final exam. I think we're going to see some great results. Does that mean we can skip review week? Mr. Phillips joked. He smiled. I said I was optimistic, not foolish. See you all next week. The class laughed and packed up as the bell rang. Tyson leaned back against the desk at the front of the room, feeling a warm satisfaction in his chest. He truly enjoyed teaching. As the students left, a journalist who had been observing him approached from the side of the room. He suspected she had taken some extra photos of him, too. I see it now. You have a different way of teaching that really connects with them. She glanced to her side as Miss DeWitt left, smiling back at Tyson. Some students seem more eager to connect than others. She studied him, curious if he might share anything confidential, but he simply waited. She sighed. Are you really saying you've never thought about accepting any offers from these eager young students? I won't ruin this school's reputation with any scandals. I would never get involved with a student from my class, and I make sure to gently discourage any who show that kind of interest. You pointed out they're young. I could be their grandfather, he admitted. Sydney stopped and looked at him. Wow, I keep forgetting you're nearly 60. He smiled softly. I am 60. She blinked in surprise. Then her grin returned. You don't look like any 60-year-old I know. He shrugged. I need to prepare for my next class. Did you get all the information you need for your article? Actually, I was hoping we could continue this interview over dinner. I'd like to learn more about how your life has changed since the accident, she said with hope in her voice. I have a rental car, so I can drive us anywhere you'd like. My travel budget covers dinner. His expression became serious. I don't use cars anymore. I ride my bicycle to work. He noticed her interest in this fact and her disappointment about not continuing the conversation. While he wasn't eager to discuss his life, he felt he should give a good interview. If you'd like to join me for dinner at my place tonight, I can share the address. I have a nice roast cooking. Are you vegan? She smiled broadly and waved her hand across her full figure. Not vegan. I eat all kinds of food. He smiled back and gave her the address, which she saved in her phone. Sydney looked up from her phone. Do you know where George Haley is? Can you tell me what he looks like? His office is just down the hall from mine. He looks a bit like a younger Einstein, Tyson said. She laughed. I've met him. He helped me find your office this morning and told me to wait in there. Did he know you would be in such a state? Tyson rubbed his face and nodded. He likes to create a little trouble. I had just been teasing him about how he needs his assistant, Gail. This was payback. "Are you friends?" she asked. He nodded with a warm smile. "Yes, he's my best." Tyson paused, thinking of someone who once held that title. He cleared his throat and turned to gather his notes. "I'll see you tonight at 7? Sydney watched him. "Yes," she replied. With a nod, Tyson motioned for her to go ahead, then locked the classroom door before heading to the washroom for a moment of privacy, expecting she wouldn't follow him. George looked up when he heard a knock. The journalist he met earlier was standing there, smiling. He smiled back. "Nice trick you played on Tyson this morning," she said. George chuckled. "Glad I could help." She grinned, showing she held no resentment. She stepped inside and sat down in front of his desk. "It might have made things a bit awkward, but it gave me a great angle for my story. My editor will be happy, so thank you." George nodded again with a smile. "Who is Tyson Kane's best friend?" she asked directly. His smile faltered before he nodded slightly. "These days, that's probably me." "So it used to be his wife?" she asked. He nodded, raising one eyebrow. He sighed. "His best friend once was a woman named Ashley Collins. They grew up next to each other and were very close until he went to Europe for school. While he was gone, she married the previous dean of the university, Franklin Dunnings. Ashley helped Tyson get his job here." He paused, preparing to explain further. "At Franklin's retirement party, Ashley's marriage ended badly. After that night, Ashley disappeared and went to Europe somewhere. We haven't heard from her since." George could see thoughts swirling in the reporter's mind. Finally, she spoke. "Childhood friend and wife. Friends or rivals?" He frowned. "I don't want to guess about that, and I strongly suggest you don't bring it up with Tyson." The woman looked at him, then nodded. She got up quickly. "Thanks again for your help this morning." George nodded as he watched her leave, feeling a bit uneasy. He thought about where this story was going and hoped the dean would review it before it got published, for Tyson's sake. Sydney had a lot of great material for an interesting story. Tyson's change from a chubby bear before the accident to a fit tiger afterward and his exceptional teaching, both before and after, made for fascinating reading. She needed to learn more about what he was like before the accident and his friendship with his old best friend. She stopped to talk to the two women at the small office. "Hi, I'm Sydney Calaber from The New Yorker. I'm working on a story about Tyson Kane." The women smiled broadly, clearly fans of Tyson. "I spoke to George Haley, but I'd like to find more people who can share information about Tyson's work before the accident." The two women exchanged glances, and the one with a ponytail seemed to have an idea. She turned to her colleague. "Mrs. Cromwell." The other woman nodded eagerly. "The library is where Mrs. Cromwell works now. She was in human resources for years. She knows a lot about everyone." "Thank you," Sydney said, waving as she left the office. Now she had someone to find. After his last class, Tyson hurried back to his office to change into his cycling clothes. He was meeting Miranda by the east gate of the campus. She had sent him a message earlier claiming she had a surprise for their ride. They were taking longer rides out into the countryside now. As he opened the bathroom door, he came face to face with Felicity. She looked up at him, appearing worried. "Felicity? What's wrong?" he asked. "That writer from the magazine, the one doing the story about you?" she said. He nodded. "She was asking for the name of someone who worked with you before the accident." She took a deep breath. "We told her about Mrs. Cromwell." Tyson squeezed his eyes shut and pinched the bridge of his nose. "One of my contacts let me know that she overheard them in the library talking about Devin Wilson." Felicity looked very unhappy. Tyson gritted his teeth at the mention of the man. He truly disliked one person, and that was Devin. He had crossed a line with Tyson. Tyson had received help from Imani. His mood was sinking when suddenly he felt a slim, young figure cling to him. "I'm so sorry," Felicity said, her voice shaky against his chest. He looked down into her warm brown eyes and saw her regret and desire. He gently held her ponytail, and she looked at him with wide eyes. Tilting her head back, he kissed her softly, and she responded with a light sigh. He explored her lips slowly, enjoying the moment. Finally, he let her deepen the kiss as his other hand found a sensitive spot through her thin sweater. Felicity's hands moved to touch him, showing her eagerness. Feeling her excitement rise, he pulled back slightly, their last kiss lingering on his chin. He gazed into her eyes, which were filled with longing. "Join me," he said softly. Felicity needed no more encouragement. She knelt and gently pulled down his pants. His breath deepened as she kissed him softly. With her face close, he couldn't tell if she needed air, so when he felt her fluttering against him, he guided her back so she could breathe again. They playfully exchanged movements, feeling the tension build. Tyson placed his hands on her head, leading a steady rhythm. Felicity touched herself, clearly caught in her own moment of joy. She gasped as a wave of pleasure took over her. Tyson could feel his own pleasure rising, and he let it flow, feeling an overwhelming sense of satisfaction. He enjoyed the moment before slowly guiding her away, making sure she savored every bit. As she looked up at him, a hungry look in her eyes, he smiled but checked the time and realized he was running late. "Oh no, she might leave without me," he exclaimed, quickly helping Felicity to stand. He pulled up his shorts, kissed her again, and saw her return his smile. "You were wonderful," he said, but he didn't have time to linger. "Could you please lock up on your way out?" The office workers had keys, so he was confident it would be done. Felicity nodded with a smile. He couldn't help but wonder what was making her so happy, but he put it out of his mind. He nodded back, slipped on his shoes, and hurried out the door. As he raced down the hallway, he paused to lean in the doorway of George's office, where George was talking to Gail. They both stopped when they saw him. "Have a good night," he called out as he continued on his way. He thought he heard Gail say something, but he needed to keep moving to avoid being late. Checking his phone, he saw a message from Miranda. "Heading east on HWY 18. Catch up." He noticed she had just left, so he knew he had to pick up the pace, but he was determined to reach her. He ran to the bike locker and quickly worked the lock. "Professor Kane?" He turned and saw Miss DeWitt standing nearby with her books. Her eyes widened as she looked at him, which made him aware of the time slipping away. He quickly turned back to the locker as he took off his shoes. "Yes?" He switched to his cycling shoes and put his sneakers away, but she hadn't said anything yet. He turned back to her as he adjusted his shoes. "I'm really in a rush. Is there something I can do for you, or can it wait until Monday?" He noticed she seemed a bit distracted, staring at him in a way he didn't understand. "Monday?" she asked, sounding a bit breathless. "Yes," he replied, surprised. "Great. I will see you then." He rolled his bike out, locked the locker, and gave his bike a quick check. Time to go. With one last smile at the pretty woman, he jumped on his bike and sped off. He rode through town until he reached the start of Highway 18, then leaped off his seat to push hard on the pedals. He knew he had to catch up to Miranda before the steep part of the road, or she would get too far ahead. Tyson wasn't sure how fast he was going, but it felt like he was flying as the scenery rushed past. He loved riding his Cannondale. Its strong frame made sure every ounce of his effort transferred directly to the bike. He felt nimble and quick as he rode with all his might. Even though he was strong and muscular when he was cycling, it felt like he was gliding with each movement full of energy. Approaching the climb, he spotted Miranda 2/3 of the way up the slope. The hillside wasn't too steep, but the length would drain anyone's energy. If he didn't catch her in that last stretch, she'd win. Not today, he thought with a grin. Tyson took advantage of a slight downhill before the climb to pick up speed and launched himself up the hill. He shifted the gears smoothly to keep a steady pace, building up his strength until he passed her at the top of the hill. He raised his fist in celebration like he had just won a special jersey at a big bike race. He stopped at a small spot near the guardrail and noticed he had an audience. He smiled shyly as he saw 5 other cyclists, 3 men and 2 women in bright jerseys, standing by their shiny bikes, watching him with amused expressions. Miranda rode up beside him and rolled her eyes. She pulled out a pack of tissues from her pocket and handed him one. "You've got a bit of someone's lipstick on your lips. Felicity, is that why you were late?" He was taken aback by her tone as he wiped his lips. He looked at the tissue and saw there was quite a bit on it. He glanced back at her. "Sorry for the holdup. I tried to leave as quickly as I could." He tucked the tissue away. She let out a frustrated sound and took another tissue, trying to clean the trace from his chin. "If you follow those marks down, you might find out where they lead," joked one of the male cyclists. The young woman next to him playfully hit his arm, and the rest laughed. Tyson caught Miranda's hand and looked at her with a question in his eyes. She simply pulled her hand back, leaving him with the new tissue. He wiped his chin absent-mindedly, waiting for her to explain. "I think Professor Kane can manage on his own, Miranda," the nearest male cyclist said, glancing between them. Tyson turned to the group. "Is this the surprise you mentioned?" he asked, hoping to lighten the mood. The young man reached out his hand. "Hi, I'm Ken Drake. I'm Miranda's boyfriend." Tyson smiled and shook his hand. "Nice to meet you. Miranda told me about you two. Congrats." Ken nodded politely, but still looked a bit uneasy. One of the other couples moved a bit closer. "I'm Tim, and this is the lovely Penny," Tim said, gesturing to his partner. Tyson nodded and smiled back at them. The last two seemed ready to go. "David and Riley," the last man said. "We need to get moving before it gets dark." Tyson agreed and signaled for them to start riding again. The path ahead looked clear, so they set off. Tyson knew he would have to wait for Miranda's explanation later. The other side of the hill was a winding path down, which was not Tyson's strength, so he took it a bit slower than the others, who all seemed very skilled at downhill riding. Once they reached the valley, he had to speed up to catch up with the group. When he started, Tyson's strength and energy helped him zoom ahead of the others on the smooth roads and gentle curves of the valley. At the intersection of Highway 18 and County Road 10, there was a small gas station and snack shop where cyclists stopped to recharge. Tyson picked up a bag of mixed nuts and dried fruit and filled his water bottle at a spring water tap. Tim approached him, hands on his hips and a big smile on his face. "I was a bit worried you'd slow us down on that descent, but wow, I couldn't keep up with you on the flat parts. How did you get so strong and build up your stamina?" Tyson laughed. "Yeah, I'm not great at descending, but I do well on climbs and flat roads." He thought for a moment. "If the descent were straight, I might manage it better." He shrugged. "I strength train and swim every day." "Didn't you get badly hurt in that crash with the train?" David asked bluntly, and Riley shot him an annoyed look. "What? He did," David replied defensively. Tyson sighed and nodded. "Yeah, I have a lot of titanium pins and screws in me. I probably couldn't get through airport security with all this." "So how do you do it?" David pressed, still not ready to accept being outpaced by someone older. Tyson took a deep breath and focused on David's frustrated face. "I had to rebuild myself after the crash. The therapy was really tough and felt like it would never end, but I kept going. I had to learn to walk again, and I won't be able to jog or run anymore. My doctors told me to avoid any exercises that were hard on my body. Miranda helped me get back into cycling. I had never owned a bike like this one before. It was a gift from a friend." Miranda smiled at him but looked away when Ken glanced her way. Tyson worried that his presence might complicate things for the couple. "When I left the hospital, I started swimming in the lake near my home. Every day I would swim as far as I could." He paused, knowing he should not say he was pushing himself against the lake. "Anyway, I think my swimming helped improve my stamina and lung capacity." He looked David in the eye. "I don't stop when it hurts. I push through it. That's just who I am." He shrugged. That seemed to take the wind out of David's sails. He walked back to his bike. "Who's Felicity?" Penny asked with a playful grin. Tyson just smiled and shook his head, which made Penny pout. "If you don't mind me asking, how old are you?" Riley asked cautiously. "I don't mind at all. I just turned 60, Tyson replied. Riley smiled. "So there's hope for us if we keep exercising. Exercise is the key to staying young." "I believe it's a big part," Tyson agreed. "Eating healthy food is important too. Give your body the nutrients and energy it needs to work well, but not more than that. What happens next depends on your genes, which is a bit of a mystery to me." The others laughed lightly at that. They continued riding, and Tyson was happy to be riding with a group for the first time. At the second and final break, near a small park where County Road 10 met Highway 23, he learned more about the others. They were members of the bike club that Miranda had tried to join. After Ken and the others couldn't convince the club leaders to let her in on her second try, they decided to leave and join her instead. They were tired of the club's strict rules. It wasn't enjoyable anymore. Tyson understood that feeling. He was really loving the ride. Highway 23 had a wide paved area for them to ride back to town, so even though it was a busy road, they managed to avoid the traffic. As they neared the edge of town, David and Riley waved goodbye and went to their home. Shortly after, Tim and Penny waved farewell, too. Before Ken and Miranda left, Tyson wanted to say something. "Can we stop for a moment?" Ken nodded, and they pulled over in a gas station parking lot. Tyson turned to Miranda. "I really liked the surprise of riding with everyone, so thank you for that." They both nodded, but neither said anything, indicating there was more to discuss. "I noticed there seems to be some tension because of my presence. I'm not sure what that is, but I want you to know I don't want to come between you two. I won't be joining your group." "No, you have to join," Miranda insisted. Ken looked back and forth between them. "Is there something you want to tell me?" he asked Miranda. She looked at him, her expression shifting. "What do you mean?" "Why did you seem jealous when he showed up?" Ken asked. Tyson felt uneasy too. It appeared that Miranda hadn't told her new boyfriend about their past, but that part of their relationship ended months ago. Miranda looked uncomfortable. Tyson took a deep breath. This could complicate things, but honesty was important. "Miranda and I are just friends now." Ken raised an eyebrow. "Now?" Tyson nodded. "We met last year. As I said, it was her idea to get me cycling, which helped me get out of my shell during a tough time. We had a close friendship and were together, but we both knew it wouldn't turn into something more. When Miranda said she was interested in someone else, we decided to end the romantic part, but stay friends." He glanced at Miranda, who looked guilty. "That's my part. Miranda, please." She looked at him, her cheeks flushed and eyes slightly teary. She cleared her throat as both Ken and Tyson waited for her to respond. "My reaction today surprised me too," she said softly. "I had never thought Tyson was seeing anyone else. I knew in my head we weren't in the same relationship anymore, but my heart wasn't ready to accept it." Tyson raised his eyebrows while Ken frowned. "Are you in love with him? Why did you choose to be with me? Were you just playing with my feelings?" he asked sharply. "No, I'm not playing with you. I really like you, and I want to see how our relationship can grow," she replied earnestly. She glanced at Tyson. "I'm sorry. It's hard to let go of feelings for someone you've been close to. I'm just learning, and there's no guide for this." Tyson nodded. "I understand. I should have been stronger. I won't let anything ruin a friendship, and it sounds like you two are good together. You should talk about this openly and kindly. If you figure it out and still want me in the cycling group, just let me know. Thanks for the ride tonight. It was really enjoyable." He reached out to shake Ken's hand with a hopeful smile. After a brief pause, Ken shook his hand, nodding to Miranda, who appeared to need some space. Tyler rode away, feeling relieved as he sped through the last stretch. He checked the time and noticed he still had an hour before his guest would arrive. He breathed a sigh of relief. Then he remembered what Felicity had said about the questions Sydney had for Mrs. Cromwell. Mrs. Cromwell was one of the last guests to leave the party that night, and she had a reputation for gossip. He suddenly felt less excited about the evening ahead. The small roast smelled wonderful. When he took it out of the oven, it looked just as good as it smelled. The roast potatoes were crispy and golden, and the baby carrots were soft. He figured there was just enough for two, which meant he didn't need to rush to add other vegetables. Fresh rolls and butter were already set at the table. He made sure he had fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and whipped cream for dessert ready. The sound of gravel in the driveway told him his guest had arrived. He opened the door to see Sydney getting out of her rental car. She walked around and smiled at him. She had changed into a sundress that was bright yellow with wide orange stripes. The dress fit her nicely. She wore tan sandals that reached her ankles and held a bottle of red wine in her right hand. "You look great tonight," Tyson said, smiling. "You didn't have to bring wine." She walked up the stairs and offered him the bottle. "Never come without something," she said, smiling. He noticed the food was prepared. "Please come in," he said, stepping aside to let her in. She looked around. "Your home is beautiful. It's larger than I expected. Do you have 2 bedrooms?" she asked with a sigh. "Thank you. Yes, it is," he replied. "Really, how did you get a house by the lake?" she asked. "I inherited it from my parents," he replied simply. "Dinner is ready." Her smile grew wider. "It smells amazing." I made prime rib. Would you like hot mustard, steak sauce, or something else? He suggested. How do you eat it? She asked. With gravy, he answered. She smiled and nodded. I'll have the same. Tyson motioned for her to sit and then filled 2 plates, bringing them to the table. Oh, wow, this smells incredible. Where did you learn to cook? She asked. I was an only child and both my parents worked. My mom taught me how to cook to help out. That really helped when I studied in England. No one else could cook, so I prepared meals for my friends, he explained. Friends? She asked, raising an eyebrow. He smiled shyly. That's just what we called our group. The dorm looked like an old barracks, and we liked that idea. He opened the wine and poured them each a glass. As they took their first bites, they smiled, enjoying how tender the roast was. Can I ask you about your early years after you came back? Sydney asked. He took another bite and thought. After swallowing, he looked at her. I might answer, but you can ask anything. They both sipped their wine, agreeing it paired well with the food. Sydney began. When you returned from Europe, you found out your best friend, Ashley Collins, had married. Did you ever have feelings for her? He looked at her seriously. I see we're getting into the tough questions. Well, no, that never happened. But you wouldn't have said no, she said, raising an eyebrow. Tyson looked at her thoughtfully. It doesn't really matter. There was no chance. I came back and she was married. Then I met Imani, fell in love, and we got married. Years went by before Ashley's marriage ended. Then Imani had her accident. I found out Ashley had moved to Europe. It's all in the past. We both moved on. Sydney shifted the topic, asking lighter questions about his childhood, focusing on fun stories of growing up and adventures with Ashley. They enjoyed their meal and continued their conversation. Finally, Sydney looked around at the photos on the walls. I recognize your wife in some of these pictures, she said. She was very pretty. Tyson just nodded and kept eating. I don't recognize the young blonde in the photos, she said, pointing to pictures of Christy. He looked at them and then back to his plate. That's Christy Taylor. She helped me get out of my shell. Another friend, Miranda Moreno, suggested cycling as a way for me to get around. Christy bought the bike I used to get to campus. He smiled as he remembered how they had argued about whether he should pay her for it. She was such a strong-willed young woman. He noticed Sydney watching his smile with a knowing look. What about you? Do you have someone special in your life? He asked, changing the subject. Her smile grew wider. Yes, I'm married. It's been 3 years. Her name is Phoebe, and she's a nurse. She held his gaze with confidence. A nurse in New York City. That must be a hard job, he said. And she nodded, pleased that he was being open-minded. It's nice to see someone your age who thinks that way, she commented. Tyson laughed. Glad to see someone knows my real age. She chuckled. You really don't look your age. Whatever you're doing to stay young, keep it up. You might make a fortune teaching it to others. He shrugged as he used his roll to finish his meal. I have enough money for the life I want. I live simply, so my expenses are low. He looked at the journalist. For dessert, I have fresh strawberries, angel food cake, and real whipped cream. She nodded with delight, so he cleared the plates and brought over the dessert ingredients. They served themselves and enjoyed the sweet treat. Tyson cleared the dishes while Sydney settled on the couch in the living room with her glass of wine. He joined her with his own drink, and they turned slightly to face each other. Sydney gave him a small smile. You looked like you were ready for my next question. Devin Wilson? Tyson tensed without even realizing it. She noticed his stiffness. You don't like him, she said softly. Tyson scoffed at her understatement. No, I don't like him. I can't stand him and what he did. As embarrassing as his affair with Imani was for me, I want him to be known for his actions. Did you press charges? Sydney asked. Tyson nodded. I don't expect much from the courts since all I have is his confession. Imani never told me about the affair. His mind flashed back to the image of Imani's eyes just before the train hit. He remembered her looking guilty, but he knew those memories were shaped by what he now knew. The thought made him tense up. Tyson, are you okay? Sydney's worried voice broke through the fog in his mind, and he opened his eyes to see her leaning over him, looking concerned. He felt his muscles twitching and tried to relax. Yes, sorry. What happened? She asked as she sat down on the couch beside him. I had a flashback. It was about the accident. The last time I talked to Imani, we were arguing about Ashley. Imani thought I liked her. Wow, that's rich, Sydney said. Tyson raised an eyebrow at her. Sorry, she added, looking a bit embarrassed. After a moment, when Tyson felt steadier, he nodded. I was upset, so I brought up how she acted around Devon. This was right before the accident. He hadn't meant to say that, but the words just came out. Oh no, I'm so sorry, Sydney said softly, clearly shaken by what he shared. Do you have enough for your article? Can we end the evening now? I'm a bit tired, Tyson asked. He wanted to stop talking. Oh, sure. Yes, I have enough, she replied. Tyson stood and walked Sydney to the door. She turned and hugged him. You're a good man, Tyson. Just my opinion, but you didn't deserve any of this, she said. He hugged her back. Thank you. Take care out there. With a final look, she nodded and left. He watched until she drove away. He locked the door and picked up the empty wine glasses, taking them to the kitchen. He focused on washing the dishes and cleaning up, losing himself in the simple tasks. When he was done, he noticed there was still half a bottle of wine left. He poured himself another glass, turned off all the lights, and sat on the couch, watching the flames flicker in the small wood stove. Sipping the wine, he tried to push away any thoughts other than the fire. I hurt you, he sighed as her voice echoed in his mind. Yes. He was too tired to fight the illusion tonight. That was never my intent. The flames played with the wood, and he enjoyed watching the fire. It felt safer than the voice. It didn't matter. You ruined everything good. You broke me too, he said tiredly. No, you're stronger than ever. He frowned at Imani, who sat at the far end of the couch. Beautiful, beyond reach, and deeply sad. I wish you had lived to see this, he said, gesturing to himself. Looking away, a single tear rolled down her cheek. Tyson suddenly stood up, filled with frustration. He moved to the patio doors and stepped outside into the backyard. He walked down to the sand and stood, gazing out at the calm water. The sun had just set, but there was still enough light to see. He looked up at the clear sky, free of clouds. The night was calm and quiet. After taking a moment to enjoy this calm, he breathed deeply to relax himself. This helped him regain his clear thinking. His thoughts were tangled with emotional issues tonight. It was overwhelming. I'm sorry. Please stop saying that, he said softly. He looked to the side and saw Imani standing there with her hands clasped together. She looked both lovely and troubled. He turned to her. I don't want to hold on to anger about you. I loved you. Yes, there was a mistake, but staying angry won't help. I only need you to leave. It's been 7 years. Please let it go. I can't, not yet. He turned back to the water. Why is this happening? The lake doesn't want you. I get it. I don't need to hear it again. He sighed tiredly and noticed she was gone. He was by himself. He realized it was hard to ignore these visions. He wondered if he was losing his grip on reality. He hoped that wasn't true. It would be frustrating to endure all this pain and get back to his life, only to lose his mind now. For Tyson, the month after Sydney's interview passed with his usual activities and endo-fear routines. The final exams came and went, and his students did well. Miss DeWitt raised her score by 22 points. She got a perfect grade and was thrilled with her success. She was going to celebrate her graduation with 2 weeks in France, but she planned to visit Tyson for a treat when she got back. Miranda sent him an email to apologize, saying she would need some time to focus on her relationship with Ken, who felt a bit insecure about her feelings for Tyson. He replied that he understood. Although he was sad to lose a riding partner, her relationship was more important. On a solo weekend ride on the same path where he had met Ken and his friends, Tyson met the town's official cycling club. About 18 cyclists, mostly young men, caught up to him at the start of a downhill section and tried to leave him behind. Tyson pushed ahead, weaving through the group. Some managed to stay close behind him, but when he reached the front on the long, straight stretches and gentle curves, he pulled ahead of them one by one until only one cyclist remained with him when they reached the small gas station parking lot. The young man was too tired to talk, so Tyson went inside to grab a bag of dried fruit and nuts. The group was coming in as Tyson stepped back outside to fill his water bottle. He smiled at the cyclists who watched him munch on his snack with tired expressions. One of the young men, the first one he overtook on the straight stretch in the valley, walked over to him. "I'm Peter Hamlin, president of this cycling club. You really surprised us. None of us thought you could be that fast, and we certainly didn't think you could keep that speed for so long. Did you leave us all behind?" "Tyson Kane. One of you managed to keep up with me." Tyson looked around and pointed to the man resting under a tree. "That guy. He was determined." He looked back at Peter and noticed the man's face turning red. He raised an eyebrow in curiosity. "Tyson Kane? The professor? You're older than I thought?" Peter exclaimed, and everyone in the group turned to look. Tyson smiled at the man's surprise. "So?" "Forget it. I was going to ask you to join our club," Peter said quickly. "So my bike skills impressed you, but now that you know my age, you don't want me? Ken was right. This club is not for me." Tyson shrugged and walked back to his bike, filling his water bottle at the spring water tap. He got on his bike, waved, and pedaled away from the parking lot. He was really enjoying his newfound freedom. He had no desire to return to driving a car. With summer coming, he wouldn't have to make weekend trips to the university, giving him more time for personal rides. He was even considering bike camping that summer. He had time to spare. Riding past the hospital, he felt happy remembering that Devin Wilson no longer worked there. Being charged with a serious crime against one of the hospital's well-respected administrators had finally led to action from hospital management. For once, they didn't protect their top surgeon. He lost his job and likely won't work in a hospital again. Tyson stopped for ice cream and thought back to his first ride with Miranda, smiling at the memory. She and Christy had pulled him out of the shell he had built around himself. He hadn't found a way out on his own. They had helped him break free from a rut, and if they hadn't stepped in, he might still be stuck there. He rode home slowly, trying to enjoy the day. He had no other plans. Maybe he'd light the grill for dinner. He would have invited George, but his friend was in Austria visiting others, and that was the extent of Tyson's social life. Just one friend. That felt a bit sad. Barbara, his neighbor, was away visiting one of her children's homes. He thought about Christy, who was living her dream in New York City. Miranda and her partner were on a road trip through the States. Even Leona and Felicity were away for the summer. He wasn't sure if they would return in the fall. Tyson felt a bit down. He had spent 5 years alone, and it hadn't bothered him at the time. But now, he found himself wanting to connect with people again. He realized he truly missed Imani, even the way he imagined her. Since his dinner with the journalist, she hadn't appeared in his thoughts. He longed to talk to the real Imani, not just his memory of her. He thought her distance might have been because she was unhappy with him, and he needed clarity on that. He hadn't seen the article that Sydney wrote. He started to worry about it being published, unsure if he would read it at all. If anything, he planned to ask George and Gail to read it and share their thoughts. As he reached the end of his driveway and got off his bike, he saw a small red Fiat 500 parked on the gravel. Miss DeWitt was sitting on his steps, unaware of his presence as she typed on her phone. Tyson felt a quick rush of excitement. It was Miss DeWitt. But then a wave of sadness hit him. He understood why she was there. His heart was telling him no. It was saying no to an easy connection with Miss DeWitt. It was saying no to any more encounters with Leona and Felicity if they returned. There would be no more brief moments with people who would just leave him with regrets afterward. With Imani gone, he felt lost. He needed to start fresh, but he couldn't do that by bouncing from one relationship to another. Taking a deep breath to calm himself, he walked towards the steps. When she heard his footsteps, she looked up and smiled, but that smile faded when she noticed his expression. "You promised," she said, looking disappointed. He stopped a few steps away from her. "I know, I'm really sorry, I just can't do this anymore." Her eyes widened in surprise. "You can't?" He blinked, then chuckled lightly. "No, it's not that. I'm okay. It's just, emotionally, I need more. I can't keep having these brief moments for excitement. I thought I would be settling down and enjoying life with a partner. That doesn't fit with your plans." She shook her head sadly. "You have a bright future ahead of you, filled with chances for fun and adventure. I'm not the right person to join you in that. I lost the one I wanted to share my later years with, and now I need to find a new path. I'm sorry for not keeping my promise." She stepped forward to embrace him, and he welcomed the hug. I can't say I'm not let down, but I understand. When they broke the hug, she turned towards her car but stopped suddenly as she noticed a woman standing at the end of the driveway, watching them quietly. She felt her cheeks getting warm and held her hands together in front of her. I might know someone who would want to spend those later years with you. Tyson felt a rush of emotions that took his breath away. He was scared that if he breathed too deeply, this moment would vanish, just like Amani did. Her sun-kissed blonde hair flowed down past her shoulders. Her face was familiar, yet had changed with time and the outdoors. Freckles dotted her cheeks and nose, showing she'd spent lots of time outside. Her warm skin showed that too. She wore a lovely sundress without sleeves and sandals. Her arms looked strong from working outside, keeping her healthy and fit. Ashley? Oh my God, Tyson managed to say. He took a step closer, then another until he saw her coming toward him. He rushed to hug her tight, feeling real joy in her presence, the soft scent around her, and her comforting warmth. Tyson, you're squeezing too tight, she said with a bit of surprise in her voice. He quickly set her down and tried to meet her gaze, but his vision was blurry. He wiped his eyes, but they didn't clear up, and he noticed his cheeks felt wet. I'm crying? He mumbled, feeling puzzled. A warm, soft voice chuckled nearby. So am I. Ashley, you're really here? He quickly pulled his jersey over his head and used it to dry his eyes. Oof, you've really changed since I last saw you, Ashley said with a bright smile. Tyson heard a sigh of disappointment nearby. After blinking a few times, he finally saw Ashley clearly. Though she had aged, she was still the most beautiful person he had seen in a long time. He turned to see Miss DeWitt looking somewhat upset. Stephanie, this is Ashley Dunnings. Collins, Ashley corrected gently. He nodded in apology. Sorry, Ashley Collins, my best friend. This is Stephanie DeWitt, a former student of mine. And would-be admirer? Ashley asked with a playful smile. I was this close, Stephanie said, holding her fingers close together. She playfully touched Tyson's chest with a gentle sigh. Food for daydreams. She smiled at Ashley. It was great to meet you, Ashley. Enjoy, lucky girl. She said it playfully, so there were no hard feelings. Stephanie got into her sporty car while Tyson and Ashley moved to the steps. With a quick honk, Stephanie drove off. Tyson watched her leave, then turned back to Ashley with a puzzled look. How did you get here? He asked. Ashley gave a shy smile. I actually drove a rental and followed her. When she parked here, I went past and parked next door. I waited in my car watching her and saw her sit on the steps because you weren't home. When you arrived, I quietly got out of my car and moved to the edge of the bushes to listen. I was unsure if you had a new girlfriend. I don't. I'm not with anyone. Well, George Haley is still my friend, he replied, excitement clear on his face. She was back. Should I move my car? She asked. Oh, you can, but Barbara won't be back for a week, he said with a smile. Later then. Should we go inside? Ashley asked, enjoying the happy look on his face. Of course. Please come in, Tyson quickly said. He went up the stairs and opened the door for her. Once she was inside, he hurried down and brought his bike upstairs, placing it beside the door. Can I get you something to drink? He asked. Water would be nice, she replied as she settled onto the sofa and looked around. Tyson rushed into the kitchen and came back with a glass of water. He handed it to her and said, I can't believe you're here. What perfect timing. He sat next to her. I thought you'd never want to see me again. What I did that night was terrible, she suddenly said, shaking her head sadly. I went to Tuscany, Italy to stay with my aunt at her vineyard. She helped me get away from Franklin. I isolated myself because I felt so ashamed. Tyson took her hand. Ashley, there was nothing to forgive. I understood what you were going through, and I cared for you too, but I wasn't available. I cared for Amani as well. Ashley nodded. I'm so sorry I wasn't there for you after she passed away. I didn't know until Miss Caliber found me at my aunt's vineyard. Sydney Caliber, the journalist? Tyson asked, surprised. Ashley nodded. Yes, she said her editor sent her to find me for a story. She's an amazing investigator, as the connection between my family and my aunts is not easy to find. She told me everything that happened here after I left. I cried a lot that night. I felt like I had let my best friend down again. Tyson softly kissed her hand. You never let me down because you didn't know. I missed you so much, but I understood you needed to leave the place that hurt you. Tears filled her lovely blue eyes. I never wanted to leave you. I thought I had to protect your marriage. I didn't know you were actually alone. Did you mean what you said in the driveway? Will you share your life with me? She burst into happy tears. Yes, Tyson, yes, Ashley whispered with joy. They shared a long, heartfelt kiss, both realizing they were crossing the line from friends to something more. Her hands gently tangled in his hair as he held her face tenderly, deepening the moment they'd both dreamed of. Ashley sighed happily, recalling the brief, hesitant kiss they'd shared years ago. Now, there was no hesitation, just a feeling of closeness and mutual care. Tyson gently lifted her into his arms and carried her into his bedroom, placing her softly on the bed. He lay beside her, brushing his lips against hers with warmth and devotion, as if capturing every detail of this long-awaited moment. For Tyson, this was a turning point, one he had once imagined when he returned from Europe. Back then, he'd realized how much she meant to him, but upon his return, he'd learned she had married. He'd regretted not being more open about his feelings before he left. I'm so sorry, he blurted out. What? Ashley asked, surprised. I left for Europe without ever telling you how much you meant to me. I thought I had all the time in the world. I didn't consider that you might move on. I was so self-focused back then, Tyson admitted, his voice filled with regret. Shh, she whispered, smiling softly. We were young and didn't know any better. I was intimidated by your talent, so I chose Franklin because he seemed safe. I thought I could guide his life and career. I told myself it was enough. At least you found real love. I was genuinely happy for you, she said. I did love her, but maybe it wasn't enough, or maybe I was too distracted. I think I've always struggled with being wrapped up in my own world, Tyson replied, feeling the weight of his past mistakes. Ashley placed a comforting hand on his. If she didn't tell you how she felt, how could you have known? They shared another gentle kiss, pausing afterward, their foreheads resting together as they took a deep breath, savoring the moment. Ashley, I've missed you more than I can say. I love you, Tyson confessed. I love you too, she replied softly. I think I always have. Tyson chuckled, shaking his head. Why are we men so blind? We can't see what's right in front of us. Well, you see me now? She asked, her voice tender. Yes, I see you. Ashley Collins, my heart is yours. Will you promise yours to me? With all my heart, she whispered, her eyes shining. Marry me, he said with sudden joy. Yes, she replied, smiling as they shared another joyful kiss. They held each other close, both basking in the warmth of their newfound love. For the first time, they felt at peace, knowing they were finally where they were meant to be. Tyson paused, taking in Ashley's appearance with admiration. She looked vibrant and healthy, a testament to her active lifestyle on the vineyard. She reminded him so much of her younger self, with her graceful figure and warm smile. You're beautiful, he said, his voice full of genuine appreciation. Ashley smiled back, teasing him. Not as pretty as that young blonde in your living room pictures? He laughed, realizing she'd noticed the photos. Oh, you mean Christy? She does bear a strong resemblance to you from years ago. Ashley made a playful pout. Tyson couldn't help but laugh. It was an expression he recognized from Christy as well. Her name is Christy Taylor, he explained. We were close for a time, and she helped me find a way out of my own struggles. She's a good friend, and I'll always be grateful for that. Turning his attention back to Ashley, he looked at her with warmth. But you're the true beauty to me, he said softly. He pulled her close, sharing a tender kiss. Their connection was deep, grounded in years of unspoken feelings and memories. Tyson held her tightly, letting his affection speak for itself. She leaned into him, feeling his warmth, and chuckled when he gave her a gentle squeeze. They shared a light-hearted moment, with Ashley brushing her fingers over his shoulder. You know, you're in great shape yourself, she teased, a twinkle in her eyes. That girl today was right. I am very lucky. Tyson gave her a playful grin. And let me show you just how lucky you are, he replied with a mischievous gleam, lifting her onto the bed with surprising ease. They laughed together, and he kissed her forehead, letting his affection for her show in small gestures. When he finally pulled back, she relaxed on the mattress, a wide smile on her face, feeling grateful for the simple joy of being close with him again. Tyson looked at her, his own heart full. He'd waited a long time for this moment, and now they both felt at peace, content in each other's presence. The connection between them was filled with warmth, laughter, and shared memories, marking the start of a new chapter in their lives together. Ashley was filled with joy and overwhelming emotion. She looked up at Tyson, grateful for the deep connection they shared, feeling truly loved and appreciated. Tyson settled beside her on the bed, gently brushing her cheek and offering a warm, comforting smile. She felt a sense of peace wash over her, realizing just how much this moment meant to both of them. "Was that something new for you?" Tyson asked softly. She nodded, smiling. "Yes, I've never felt anything quite like this before." He chuckled, giving her hand a squeeze. "Well then, there's plenty more to look forward to." She sighed, feeling both content and a bit playful. "I want to make you feel just as appreciated, but I'm exhausted," she admitted with a small laugh. Tyson's eyes sparkled with warmth. "There's no rush. We have time, and I'm here with you." They shared a gentle, lingering kiss, savoring the quiet happiness that had blossomed between them. The simplicity of the moment, the quiet closeness, felt like the beginning of something new and lasting. "Tyson, I love you," she whispered, her eyes full of affection. "I love you too, Ashley," he replied, his own voice filled with warmth. As they held each other, they realized they had found something rare, a sense of completeness and peace. They lay together, finally at rest, each feeling they were exactly where they were meant to be. Tyson felt softer inside, but he still stayed close to her. Neither wanted this moment to end. That's how they drifted off to sleep. In the early hours of the morning, Tyson woke up on his back with Ashley nestled against him. It felt right. He glanced at the foot of the bed and saw Imani smiling at him. Making sure Ashley was asleep, he looked back at Imani with hope in his eyes. "Is it time?" he whispered. She nodded. "Goodbye, my love." And just like that, she was gone. But this time it felt final. Tyson felt lighter than he had in years. Something that had weighed him down was gone, and he felt like he might float away. But he wouldn't, because Ashley's love kept him grounded. Devin Wilson rolled down the window of his Porsche as he sped along the Pacific Coast Highway, feeling angry. He threw an empty bottle out the window and listened as it shattered against the cliff. Next to him was a copy of the New Yorker magazine. A friend from his old hospital had sent it to him, and it had an article about Tyson Kane. The title made him seethe, the math teacher who brings excitement back to the classroom. Devin was forced to hide out with a friend in California, while Tyson was treated like a star back home and overseas. Where was the fairness in that? First, he took away the love of Devin's life. Then he spent years getting fit and enjoying attention from young women, and now he had the nerve to marry his childhood sweetheart with many celebrities at the ceremony. Pictures of Tyson filled Devin with rage as he showed off his toned body in the first photo. He wore only his underwear, standing confidently in his office. Then there was the photo of Imani, and it struck deep into Devin's heart. She looked so beautiful. Below the picture was even a mention of Devin, but he was just referred to as the other man, an afterthought in their story. Tyson's new wife was working on his troubles, and they even had a honeymoon in Tuscany, Italy. He seemed to be celebrated in Europe, too. "That's so unfair!" Devin shouted in frustration as a pain throbbed in his head. The alcohol wasn't helping. He glanced over the passenger seat for another bottle, but it must have rolled out of reach. He felt the car drifting and quickly steered it back into the lane, adrenaline rushing through him, but the pain only grew worse. Devin had Tyson to thank for that, too. The hurt he caused left him with constant headaches, making it impossible for him to work. He was using up his medical insurance and savings to get by. Devin understood what he needed to do. Tyson felt a heavy resolve as he drove, his mind clouded by anger and loss. He'd borrowed something dangerous from a friend, determined to confront the pain he felt in his heart. He blamed Tyson for everything, believing Tyson didn't deserve happiness, especially while Imani was gone. In his grief, he imagined Imani beside him, her presence so vivid that it made him speak out. "Why did you leave me?" he murmured, feeling his voice crack. "I'm sorry, Devon," he seemed to hear her reply. He turned, and in his mind she was there, beautiful but sorrowful. "Are you here to stay with me?" he asked, feeling an aching hope. But her voice echoed back, "No, I love Tyson." Devon's heart filled with bitterness. Then he won't live to see tomorrow. Lost in his thoughts, Devon failed to notice the sharp turn approaching at high speed. His car veered sharply, hitting the rocky edge of the cliff, and collided with another vehicle coming around the bend. The impact sent his car over the guardrail, soaring toward the ocean below. As the car tumbled, he imagined Amani's eyes watching him, full of sadness. "The ocean is calling you," her voice whispered in his mind. Meanwhile, Tyson was finishing a swim in the lake, feeling the chill of the water as he pulled himself up to the patio. He'd swum farther than ever today, a personal best. As he walked up the grassy path, he noticed two sets of eyes on him. Barbara was, as usual, watching from her rooftop deck, a constant but harmless presence in the neighborhood. The other set of eyes belonged to Ashley, who smiled warmly as he approached. "You look like a warrior from Atlantis," she teased, handing him a towel. Her imagination had blossomed since they'd married, fueling her creativity as a writer. Tyson chuckled. "Is this inspiration for your next book?" She nodded with a playful grin, clearly enjoying his company as he dried off. They settled into the moment, each grateful for the simplicity of their time together. Tyson felt at peace, happy with the quiet life they shared, and thankful for the fresh start they'd found together. The sunlight danced across the lake as they laughed, basking in the joy of each other's company. "You're making me feel really good," he whispered softly. She smiled and held him closer as she helped him enjoy the moment more. A wave of pleasure washed over him, and he barely stayed standing as she continued to support him. "You really know what you're doing," he sighed as she let go. She smiled up at him, and he leaned down to kiss her gently. "It's your reward for sticking to your workout plan," she said playfully as he pulled away. He dried off with a towel while she watched, pleased. He put on his robe and they headed inside to start breakfast. They worked together to cook their meal and enjoyed it at the breakfast bar, with no rush since it was Saturday. After straightening up the kitchen, they shared a shower, enjoyed each other's company, and got ready for a relaxing day. Tyson planned to go for a ride later that afternoon. As they walked back to the living room, they heard a knock at the front door. "Were you expecting someone?" Ashley asked, and he shook his head. Tyson walked to the door while Ashley went to the kitchen to see what they might make for dinner. When Tyson opened the door, he froze, unable to speak. "Who is it?" Ashley called out, and that seemed to bring him back. "It's Christy, and—" He stepped back and motioned for the young woman to come in. She looked upset and was trying not to cry. Ashley joined them and gasped. On Christy's hip was a small boy about 18 months old. He had beautiful blue eyes like his mother, but his features looked like Tyson's, with curly hair that hung freely. "Is this why you didn't come to the wedding?" Tyson asked softly. Christy nodded, looking nervous. Ashley was the first to react. "He's adorable. What's his name?" Christy smiled with relief. "Aiden." "Can I hold him?" Ashley asked with excitement. Christy nodded and carefully handed the boy to Ashley. The older woman smiled, and the baby returned her gaze with a big smile. "Oh my, he's such a charmer like his dad," Ashley said, glancing at Tyson, who was still in shock. "Maybe you two can talk about this outside while I play with Aiden?" Tyson and Christy nodded and walked out the back door while Ashley found some toys. They sat on the patio, and Tyson spoke first. "How do you spell it?" "A.I. Wyden," Christy answered quickly. "So, my dad's name?" Tyson said quietly. "Why didn't you tell me?" Christy looked down, feeling ashamed. "When I visited you that weekend, I was having a tough time. I told you about my boyfriend, but really I had broken up with him months before. I wanted to be with you, but I was also focused on my career. I made some bad choices. I stopped using my birth control after we broke up, so I was able to get pregnant that weekend. We shared some really special moments together. Then we talked and you helped me think clearly. I realized I needed to focus on my career." She took deep breaths as her words poured out. When she felt more at ease, she continued. "I thought about taking the day after pill, But I just couldn't do it. When I found out I was going to have a baby, I knew I wanted to keep the baby. He's a part of you that I can hold on to. I couldn't love him more. Tyson was shocked by what she shared. Why didn't you tell me? He asked again. Christy shook her head. I didn't want you to feel responsible. You made it clear that you didn't want me. I never said that I didn't want you. But let's be real. I'm in my 60s, and you're in your 20s. You deserve to find someone who can be with you for a long time. You're so young, and there is so much ahead of you. Be patient, and keep your heart open. She nodded, but her lip quivered. He felt for her, so he pushed his chair back and opened his arms. She immediately moved to sit on his lap, and tears flowed as he gently comforted her. They stayed like that for a while until Christy managed to calm down. I always feel better when I'm with you, Christy said softly. You will find someone who can give you comfort. I'm always here as a friend and will support you in every way I can. But the deeper connection is with Ashley now. They sat together in silence, appreciating the simple joy of being close. Christy stood up and returned to her chair. My next question is, why now? Tyson asked. Christy smiled softly and raised her chin. Remember I told you my job was expanding into Europe? He nodded. I had to turn down the position because I was pregnant then. She paused to take a breath. The job is open again, but now it's global. They want me, but it means a lot of travel. I might be away for 3 weeks out of 4. The pay is more than double what I earn now, and the experience would be amazing. I can't say no. But you have Aiden. Yes, I can't take him with me, and I don't have anyone to watch him. I came home to introduce him to my parents. They didn't know either. Tyson raised his eyebrows. You didn't tell your parents? How did that go? Dad isn't speaking to me, and Mom is upset that she missed his early days, but she is happy to have a grandson. Aiden really won her over. She sighed. Mom says Dad just needs some time. She believes he will come around, but I know he can hold on to anger. Tyson nodded. Were you going to ask them for help with him? No, I wanted to ask if you could help. Aiden needs his dad. Tyson's eyes widened in surprise. I've never been a dad before. I've never been a mom before either, and I had to do it alone. She raised her hands in surrender. I know I chose this, but I really need some help now. Tyson noticed that it was hard for her to ask for help. We need to talk this over together. Ashley has a say in this too. Let's go inside. They walked back into the house and heard the happy laughter of a little boy. They found him playing on the living room floor with Ashley, who greeted them with a big smile. He's so smart. She raised her hand to invite Tyson to sit on the floor beside her. He complied, and Christy sat on his other side. Aiden quickly crawled onto Tyson's lap and reached up to him. Tyson helped the boy stand, and Aiden grabbed his hair. The little one babbled excitedly while looking at Tyson's hair, then pulled at his own. Christy had tears of joy in her eyes as she smiled at her son. Yes, he has your hair. He's your daddy. Da? Aiden asked. Christy gasped a little in surprise, and more happy tears fell. Yes, Daddy. Tyson was amazed by the thought that this bright little boy was his child. He never thought he would have kids, especially not one as wonderful as Aiden. He turned to Ashley. Christy has a job opportunity that she can't pass up. She wants to know if we could look after Aiden while she's away. Yes, Ashley replied excitedly. Tyson looked surprised at his wife. It's going to take a lot of our time. Then he focused on Christy. How long will this new job last? She held his gaze. 2 to 5 years, but if it works out well, it could be longer. I promise to spend all my free time with Aiden when I can. Tyson nodded and turned back to Ashley. This place isn't really set up for another person, Ashley scoffed. That's easy to fix. The spare room we turned into my writing space can turn back into a bedroom in no time. We could change it today. Where will you stay tonight? She asked Christy. I was planning to get a hotel room, she answered. No, you can stay here, Ashley insisted. She looked at Tyson. Christy and I can go into town and get a bed delivered this afternoon. Oh, and what about a crib for Aiden? I have his crib and everything else in my minivan, Christy admitted shyly. Tyson raised his eyebrows in surprise as Aiden reached for them. That was a bit painful. Ashley beamed again. Perfect. Are you sure I'm not putting too much on you? I know you've just gotten married, and now I'm asking you to take care of my son, Christy said. Ashley took Christy's hand. I always wanted kids. Just because I couldn't have my own doesn't mean I didn't want to help. Now that I'm married to the man I've always wanted, it feels like it's too late. Aiden's arrival is just right. Seeing the worry on the younger woman's face, she moved to lighten it. Please don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to take your place as his mother. That will always be you. I just have a lot of love in my heart that I haven't had a chance to share. Christy was tearing up with happiness. Thank you. The two women hugged tightly and then hurried to the spare bedroom to discuss how to turn it back into a bedroom. Tyson and Aiden were left in the living room, watching each other as the women busied themselves. Tyson smiled at his son, who still had his small hands in his dad's hair. Aiden giggled at his father's smile and bounced on his little legs. Da, da, da! An odd feeling surged through Tyson. He had never felt anything like it before. In that moment, he knew he would do anything to protect this little boy and make sure he was happy. He pulled Aiden close for a hug, giving him a playful sniff. The boy erupted in laughter. Tyson pressed kisses on the boy's cheeks. Aiden wrapped his little arms around Tyson's neck and gave him a sweet kiss on the cheek, too. Feeling that he was being observed, Tyson glanced towards the spare bedroom and caught Ashley and Christy watching him play with Aiden. They both looked eager. Tyson raised an eyebrow and tilted his head slightly at Ashley. She caught his hint and exchanged a look with Christy, whose face turned a nice shade of pink. Let's see what's in your minivan, Ashley said, taking Christy's hand and leading her to the front door. Since you're letting me be involved in caring for your son, we should talk things over. Then they stepped outside, leaving Tyson feeling amazed. He looked back at Aiden, who tried to mimic his surprised expression. My first lesson to you. Always leave the talking to the women. Aiden burst into giggles at his dad's serious face. Is it too early for these lessons? Tyson asked, and Aiden nodded. Happy wife, happy life, Tyson suggested, and Aiden nodded again. Tyson laughed joyfully. Son, I think this is the start of something very special. Hey, everyone! Thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss any of the exciting stories we have coming up. What do you think about the characters in this story? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear from you.